The blade fell before anyone could scream. Steel kissed flesh in a whisper, and the world held its breath for a heartbeat. Then came the roar. The arena exploded with sound as the warrior's body dissolved into shimmering particles of light. "Retired!" The announcer's voice boomed across the Colosseum, reverberating through stone and steel and bone alike. Kaido stood motionless in the center of the blood circle, his sword still raised, his breathing controlled and even. Around him, the dungeon materialized fully, walls of ancient stone rising from nothing, torches flickering to life one by one. This was the new world. Dungeons weren't death traps anymore, they were stages, and adventurers were the performers in this era. Real bodies stayed safe outside while mana-forged avatars fought within, creating spectacles that captivated millions of viewers. Death had been removed from the equation, replaced by the sting of defeat and the shame of retirement from the battlefield. Kaido lowered his blade slowly, his eyes scanning the shadows where his next opponent would emerge from the dungeon's depths. "Movement on the left flank!" his teammate Sora called out, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of the crowd above. The archer girl had already knocked another arrow, her enhanced vision allowing her to see what others could not in the dim torchlight. Kaido shifted his stance, his muscles coiling like springs as he prepared for the next engagement that was surely coming soon. From the darkness, 3 goblins burst forth, their weapons crude but their movements coordinated in a way that surprised beginners. "Tank formation!" Sora shouted, and their third member, the shield-bearer Ryu, stepped forward with his massive iron barrier. The goblins crashed against Ryu's shield like waves against a cliff, their weapons sparking harmlessly against the enchanted metal. Kaido moved with practiced precision, his blade finding the gaps in their defense, cutting through green flesh with surgical accuracy. One goblin fell, then another, their forms dissolving into motes of light that drifted upward like fireflies ascending to heaven. The third goblin retreated, its yellow eyes wide with something that looked almost like genuine fear, despite being just mana. "Don't let it escape," Ryu commanded, his voice muffled behind his helmet but still carrying the weight of absolute authority. Sora's arrow flew true, piercing the goblin's back between its shoulder blades, and it tumbled forward into a graceless heap. The dungeon floor shimmered for a moment, acknowledging their victory, and a doorway appeared in the far wall where none existed before. "3 rooms cleared," Kaito muttered, wiping his blade clean with a practiced motion that had become second nature over the years. Sora approached him, her boots making soft sounds against the stone floor that echoed strangely in the confined space around them. "You're getting faster," she observed, her amber eyes studying him with an intensity that made Kaido slightly uncomfortable, always. He shrugged, not meeting her gaze directly because compliments had always made him feel awkward and unsure of how to respond. "Just doing what needs to be done," he replied, his voice flat and emotionless in a way that had become his trademark recently. Ryu joined them, removing his helmet to reveal sweat-dampened black hair and a face marked with the concentration of battle just past. "The boss room should be next," he said, glancing at the newly appeared doorway with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Kaido nodded, his hand tightening around his sword's grip as he prepared himself mentally for what was surely their greatest challenge. This dungeon was ranked intermediate level, suitable for parties between ranks 50 and 100 in the official guild rankings. Their party, the Crimson Fangs, currently sat at rank 73, a respectable position but far from the glory they all craved. Kaido himself had been fighting in dungeons for 3 years now, ever since he turned 16 and received his class designation. The memory of that day still burned in his mind, the moment the Oracle spoke and sealed his fate with a single word. "Cursed blade," the Oracle had intoned, and everyone in the temple had fallen silent with shock and barely concealed disgust. Not a hero, not even a regular warrior class that would have been acceptable and allowed him to pursue his childhood dreams. Instead, he received a class so rare and so reviled that most people couldn't even understand what it meant or how it worked. Cursed blade users fought with weapons imbued with negative energy, draining opponents' strength while fighting on the front lines dangerously. It was considered a half measure, neither a true curse caster who could support from the rear, nor a pure warrior with straightforward power. Most parties refused to take cursed blades, viewing them as bad luck, as harbingers of misfortune that would bring only ruin and failure. Kaito had spent 2 years searching for a party that would accept him, facing rejection after rejection with mounting desperation. Then Sora found him. Or rather, she had been watching him train alone in the guild's practice yards for weeks before approaching. "You move well for someone everyone calls cursed," she had said, her words blunt but not unkind in their directness that day. That had been the beginning. Sora had her own reasons for accepting outcasts, being a half-elf in a world that preferred pure-blooded fighters. Ryu joined soon after, a commoner with tremendous defensive ability but lacking the pedigree that top parties demanded from their members. Together, they formed the Crimson Fangs, and together they had clawed their way up from rank 200 to their current position slowly. But it was never enough. Kaito could see it in Sora's eyes sometimes, the hunger for more, the desire to stand among elites. "Ready?" Ryu asked, breaking Kaito's reverie and bringing him back to the present moment and the challenge that awaited them ahead. Kaito nodded once, firmly, and began walking toward the boss room doorway with his teammates falling into formation behind him naturally. The door shimmered as they passed through it, and the world expanded into a massive chamber easily 50 meters across in every direction. At the far end, seated on a throne of bones, waited the floor boss, an orc chieftain twice the size of any normal orc warrior. The creature rose slowly, deliberately, its movements calculated to intimidate and overwhelm the hearts of those who dared challenge it here. Kaito raised his sword, feeling the familiar tingle of curse energy flowing through the blade, darkening the steel to an obsidian sheen. "Formations!" Ryu shouted, slamming his shield against the ground once, twice, 3 times in the traditional challenge that could not be ignored. The orc chieftain roared, a sound that shook dust from the ceiling and sent tremors through the stone floor beneath their feet. Then it charged, and the real battle began in earnest as steel met steel and curse energy met raw primal strength, head-on. Kaito moved to the left, drawing the boss's attention while Ryu positioned himself to block any devastating blows that might come their way. Sora circled right, her bow singing as arrows flew in rapid succession, each one aimed at the weak point she had memorized earlier. The orc swung its massive club, a weapon that could crush bone and shatter shields. But Kaito was already moving before it fell. His sword met the club shaft, and curse energy flowed from the blade into the wood, weakening its structure invisibly but effectively. The next swing came slower, the weapon heavier in the orc's grip, though it didn't understand why its strength was failing so suddenly. Kaito pressed the advantage, his blade cutting shallow wounds across the boss's arms, each cut carrying more curse energy into its body. The orc's movements became sluggish, its reactions delayed by fractions of seconds that might not seem like much, but meant everything in combat. "Now!" Kaito shouted, and Sora's special arrow, glowing with accumulated mana, flew straight and true toward the boss's exposed throat. The arrow struck home, and the orc chieftain staggered backward, its hands reaching up to claw at the shaft embedded deep within. Ryu charged forward, his shield transformed into a battering ram and slammed into the boss with all his considerable strength and momentum behind. The orc fell, its massive body hitting the ground with a thunderous crash that echoed throughout the chamber like a death knell. Kaito moved in for the final blow, his cursed blade finding the gap between the creature's ribs and piercing straight through to its heart. The boss dissolved into light, and the chamber erupted with the sound of cheering from the millions watching this broadcast throughout the land. "Floor cleared!" The announcer's voice boomed once again, and a portal appeared in the center of the room, glowing with soft blue light. Sora pumped her fist in victory, her usual composed demeanor cracking slightly to reveal the excitement she normally kept carefully hidden within. Ryu laughed, a deep booming sound that matched his build, and clapped Kaito on the shoulder with enough force to stagger him. "Good work, Curse Boy," Ryu said with genuine warmth, using the nickname that had started as mockery but become affection over time. Kaito allowed himself a small smile, rare for him these days, and nodded his acknowledgement of their successful cooperation and teamwork today. They walked through the portal together, emerging back into the dungeon's entrance chamber where guild officials waited to process their completion. The official, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, checked his ledger and marked their success with a practiced efficiency born of repetition. "Congratulations on clearing the Broken Fang dungeon," he said without much enthusiasm, his tone suggesting he did this hundreds of times daily. Kaito barely heard him, his attention already drifting to the exit where sunlight streamed through the doorway like a golden river. Outside, the real world waited, and with it, the weight of a decision he had been avoiding for weeks but could no longer postpone. His contract with the Crimson Fangs was coming to an end in 3 days, and he had received an offer from another party entirely. The Stellar Blades, ranked 37th in the world, had approached him privately with a proposition that seemed almost too good to be true. They wanted him specifically for his curse abilities, viewing them not as a liability, but as a strategic advantage in their combat style. But accepting would mean leaving Sora and Ryu behind, abandoning the people who had given him a chance when nobody else would do so. "Kaito!" Sora's voice cut through his thoughts like a knife, sharp and demanding his immediate attention without room for distraction or avoidance. He turned to face her, meeting her amber eyes that seemed to see through every defense he tried to maintain between himself and others. "We need to talk," she said simply, and those 4 words carried a weight that made Kaito's stomach twist with apprehension and dread. They found a quiet corner in the guild's common area, away from the celebrations and noise that filled the building after a successful raid. Ryu joined them, his expression serious now. The earlier joy completely vanished from his face like morning mist burned away by harsh sunlight. "You got an offer from the Stellar Blades," Sora stated flatly, not asking but confirming what she already somehow knew for certain. Kaito's eyes widened in surprise before he could stop the reaction, betraying the truth before his words could even attempt a denial. "How did you?" he began, but Sora cut him off with a raised hand, her expression unreadable but her eyes burning with intensity. "I have sources," she said curtly, then leaned forward with her elbows on her knees, studying him like a puzzle she needed to solve. "The question isn't how I know," she continued, her voice dropping lower so only their small circle could hear the words clearly spoken. "The question is what you're going to do about it, and whether you've already made your decision without telling us first," she finished. Kaito felt his throat tighten, the words he wanted to say catching there like hooks, painful and refusing to come out smoothly or easily. "I haven't decided," he managed finally, and it was true, he had been tormenting himself with indecision for weeks without reaching any conclusion. Ryu sighed heavily, the sound carrying years of experience with difficult choices and the consequences that always followed them without mercy or exception. "Listen, Kaito," Ryu began, his voice gentler than expected, almost fatherly despite being only 3 years older than Kaito himself actually was. "We both know what this is about," he continued, gesturing vaguely at the space between them, as if the answer existed physically there somehow. "You want to prove yourself, to show the world that a cursed blade can stand among the elite, that your class isn't the curse everyone says." Kaito flinched at the accuracy of Ryu's words, feeling exposed and vulnerable in a way that combat never made him feel these troubling days. "But here's the thing," Ryu pressed on, his expression growing more intense as he leaned closer to emphasize the point he was making now. "Climbing higher doesn't always mean you'll find what you're looking for up there at the top of the mountain everyone is desperate to reach. Sometimes it just means you're farther from the ground when you eventually fall," Sora added, her voice quiet but carrying a bitterness that spoke. Kaito looked between them, seeing the concern in their faces, the fear that they were about to lose their third member and possibly friend. "What would you do?" he asked finally, directing the question at Sora specifically because she was the one who seemed to understand ambition's weight. Sora was silent for a long moment, her amber eyes distant as if looking at something far beyond the walls of this building entirely. "I'd take the offer," she said finally, and Ryu's head snapped toward her in shock at her unexpected answer to the question posed. "But," she continued before Ryu could protest, "I'd make sure I wasn't running away from something, only running towards something better and worthwhile ultimately." "Are you leaving us because the Stellar Blades are stronger?" she asked, her gaze boring into Kaito with uncomfortable intensity that demanded complete honesty. "Or are you leaving because you think we're holding you back, that you can't reach your potential while fighting alongside us here?" she pressed. Kaito opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again, realizing he didn't actually know the answer to that question with any certainty. Was he running toward something or away from something? The question echoed in his mind without finding any solid ground to land upon safely. "I don't know," he admitted finally. the words tasting like defeat, even though honesty was supposed to be a virtue worth maintaining always. Sora nodded slowly, as if his confusion was exactly the answer she had been expecting to hear from him all along during this conversation. "Then figure it out," she said, standing up and shouldering her bow with a practiced motion that spoke of thousands of repetitions over years. "But do it fast, because the Stellar Blades will want an answer soon, and we need to know if we're looking for a replacement or not." She walked away without another word, leaving Kaido and Ryu sitting in uncomfortable silence that stretched between them like an unbridgeable chasm deepening. Ryu clapped him on the shoulder once more, gentler this time, and stood to follow Sora toward the guild's exit into the fading afternoon. "Whatever you decide," Ryu said over his shoulder, "make sure it's what you actually want, not what you think you're supposed to want." Then he too was gone, and Kaido was left alone with his thoughts and the weight of a decision that would shape his future. The guild hall buzzed with activity around him, adventurers celebrating victories and mourning defeats, but all of it seemed distant and muted somehow. Kaito pulled out the letter he had received from the Stellar Blades, reading it for perhaps the 100th time since its arrival last month. The words were formal but warm, expressing genuine interest in his abilities and offering him a place in their raid rotation immediately starting soon. The salary was triple what he made with the Crimson Fangs, and the prestige of fighting alongside a top 40 party was immeasurable completely. But would he be happy there? Would he find what he was searching for, or would he just discover new reasons to feel inadequate? These questions plagued him as he finally stood and made his way out of the guild hall into the cooling evening air beyond. The city of Argentum spread before him, its towers gleaming in the last rays of sunlight, a monument to humanity's achievement and adaptation. Somewhere in this city was his answer, but Kaito had no idea where to start looking for it, or how to recognize it clearly when found. He walked the streets aimlessly, his feet carrying him through familiar districts, while his mind churned through options and possibilities and consequences repeatedly, endlessly. Eventually, he found himself at the Memorial Plaza, where statues honored the heroes of the old world before dungeons became entertainment and safer overall. These were the warriors who had fought real monsters, risking true death, their bodies and souls both on the line with every desperate battle fought. Kaito stood before the statue of the legendary hero, Akira, who had single-handedly defeated the Demon King 300 years ago in history. "What would you do?" Kaito asked the stone figure, knowing it was foolish but needing to voice the question aloud to someone, somehow anyway. The statue, predictably, offered no answer, its stone eyes gazing eternally toward some distant horizon that Kaito would never be able to see. "Talking to statues now? You really must be desperate," a voice said from behind him, making Kaito spin around with hand on his sword. A girl stood there, maybe his age or younger, with silver hair that seemed to glow faintly in the twilight and eyes like molten gold. She wore simple clothing that somehow seemed elegant on her frame, and there was something about her presence that made the air feel different. "Who are you?" Kaito asked, his hand still resting on his sword's hilt, prepared for trouble, though this girl seemed harmless enough on surface. "Someone who's been watching you," she replied with a small smile that didn't quite reach those strange golden eyes of hers that seemed ancient. "That's not an answer," Kaito said flatly, his patience worn thin by the day's events and his own internal struggles with the decision ahead. The girl laughed, a sound like bells chiming, and took a step closer to him with movements that seemed to flow rather than walk normally. "My name is Luna," she said, performing a small, mocking bow that somehow didn't seem disrespectful despite its casual nature displayed here before him. "And I have a proposition for you, Kaito of the Cursed Blade, the one everyone overlooks despite his obvious talent and potential for greatness." Kaito's eyes narrowed with suspicion at her knowing his class and name, information that wasn't exactly secret, but also wasn't common knowledge widely shared. "What kind of proposition?" he asked warily, his instincts screaming that this was trouble even if he couldn't identify the specific danger she posed. Luna's smile widened, and for just a moment, Kaito thought he saw something inhuman flicker in those golden eyes before it vanished completely. "The kind that will answer all your questions," she said softly, "and show you exactly what you're capable of when nobody's holding you back. Come with me," she continued, extending a hand toward him with palm up in a gesture that seemed both inviting and somehow vaguely threatening simultaneously. And I'll show you a path that neither the Crimson Fangs nor the Stellar Blades could ever offer you, something entirely different altogether. Kaido stared at her hand, every rational part of his brain screaming at him to walk away, to refuse, to return home immediately now. But the part of him that had always hungered for more, that had driven him to keep fighting despite rejection after rejection, faced repeatedly, endlessly. That part was curious, intensely so, and before he could stop himself, he reached out and took Luna's hand in his own trembling grip. The world dissolved into silver light, and Kaito felt his stomach lurch as reality twisted around them in ways that should have been impossible. When his vision cleared, they were no longer in the Memorial Plaza, but standing in a dark chamber illuminated by floating orbs of pale light. "What?" Kaito began, but Luna silenced him with a gesture, her expression now serious and focused in a way it hadn't been before suddenly. "Welcome to the Undervault," she said quietly, her voice echoing strangely in the vast space that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions around them. The place where the real power in this world is kept hidden, away from the eyes of adventurers and their guilds and their pointless rankings. Kaido's hand went to his sword, but Luna shook her head, and he found his hand wouldn't move, frozen in place by force, invisible but absolute. "Don't be afraid," she said, though her tone suggested she didn't particularly care whether he was afraid or not. Ultimately, at this point now, "I brought you here because you have potential. Potential that's being wasted playing games in dungeons that stopped being dangerous centuries ago, now, completely." She walked deeper into the chamber, and Kaito found his feet following her despite his own desires, compelled by that same invisible force holding him. "You want to prove yourself," Luna continued, her voice floating back to him, "to show that your class isn't a curse, but a gift misunderstood. But you can't do that in the world above, where everything is safe and sanitized, where death is just a temporary inconvenience for entertainment." She stopped before a massive door carved with symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when Kaito tried to focus on them too long directly. "Beyond this door is a real dungeon," she said, turning to face him with those gold eyes burning with intensity that was almost painful to meet. "One where death is permanent, where your avatar won't protect you, where your true strength will be tested by forces beyond your imagination entirely. Clear it," she continued, "and I'll give you something worth more than any rank or party membership, worth more than all the gold and argentum. I'll give you the truth about what you really are, and the power to make the entire world acknowledge it without question or doubt remaining." Kaito felt his throat go dry, fear and excitement warring within him in equal measure as he processed her words and their implications fully. "And if I refuse?" he managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper in the oppressive atmosphere of this impossible place around them. Luna smiled, and this time it was a gentle expression, almost sad, as if she already knew what his answer would be ultimately, without doubt. "Then I return you to the plaza, and you never remember this conversation, and you make your choice between the fangs and the blades. You live a normal life as an adventurer, respectable and safe, and you never learn what you could have truly become with proper training and guidance." She stepped aside, leaving the path to the door clear, the choice entirely his to make without coercion beyond the offer itself being presented. Kaito stared at that door, at the writhing symbols that hurt to observe, at the darkness beyond that seemed to call to something deep within him. Every rational thought told him to refuse, to demand she return him immediately, that this was dangerous beyond measure and potentially fatal without question. Certainly, but that same hunger that had made him take Luna's hand whispered seductively about power, about truth, about finally being enough for once in his life. His feet moved forward on their own, carrying him toward the door while Luna watched with an expression that might have been approval or might have been pity. "A fine choice," she murmured as he reached the door, his hand extending toward the strange symbols without conscious thought directing it there automatically. "Remember, Kaito of the Cursed Blade, in there you face true monsters, and you might die permanently if you're not careful and focus completely." "But if you survive and succeed," she added, her voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to echo in his very bones somehow penetratingly deeply, "you'll become something this world hasn't seen in 300 years. Not since the last true hero walked among humanity with genuine power." Kaido's hand touched the door, and it swung open silently, revealing a darkness so complete that even the floating orbs couldn't penetrate it fully. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, calling upon every bit of training and experience he had accumulated over his 3 years of fighting dungeons. Then he stepped forward into the darkness, and the door slammed shut behind him with a finality that seemed to seal his fate forever irreversibly. Luna remained in the chamber, her smile fading as she looked at the closed door with an expression that was hard to read or interpret. "Let's see if you're worthy of the legacy sleeping in your blood," she whispered to the darkness, "or if you're just another disappointment among many." Then she too faded, dissolving into silver light that dispersed like morning mist, leaving the chamber empty and silent once more, waiting patiently. Inside the darkness, Kaido walked forward carefully, his hand on his sword, his senses straining to detect any threat before it could manifest. Gradually, a dim red glow began to illuminate his surroundings, revealing walls of black stone covered in ancient writing he couldn't decipher at all. The corridor stretched ahead into the distance, and somewhere far away, Kaido could hear something moving, something large that echoed ominously through the halls ahead. He drew his cursed blade, feeling the familiar weight and the dark energy that pulsed through it in response to his touch and will combined. Whatever waited ahead in this true dungeon, whatever test Luna had prepared for him, he would face it and prove himself worthy somehow regardless. Because turning back was no longer an option, and moving forward was the only path remaining to him now in this moment of truth. The hunt had begun, and Kaito walked deeper into the darkness with steady steps, ready to face whatever came next without hesitation or fear paralyzing. The corridor stretched endlessly ahead, each step echoing with a hollow sound that seemed to mock Kaito's solitude in this oppressive darkness. The red glow intensified gradually, pulsing like a heartbeat, and Kaido realized the light source was moving closer toward him with purpose. His grip tightened on his cursed blade as the temperature dropped sharply, his breath now visible in small clouds before his face. From the darkness emerged a creature unlike anything Kaido had encountered in 3 years of dungeon raids throughout his entire adventuring career thus far. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, its body composed of shadow and bone fused together in an anatomy that defied natural laws completely. Red eyes burned in its skull, twin points of malevolent intelligence that fixed upon Kaido with hunger that transcended mere physical appetite entirely. "A Shade Walker!" Kaito breathed, recognizing the creature from ancient texts he had studied in the guild's archives during his research sessions. These monsters had been extinct for centuries, eradicated during the Great Purge after the Demon King's defeat by legendary heroes of old times. Yet here one stood, very much alive and real, its presence radiating a malice that made Kaito's skin crawl with primal fear unconsciously. The creature moved first, closing the distance between them with impossible speed that left afterimages trailing in the dim red illumination around them. Kaido barely managed to raise his blade in time, the impact of the Shade Walker's claws sending shockwaves through his arms painfully. This wasn't like fighting in the entertainment dungeons where mana avatars absorbed the real force of blows received during staged combat safely. Here, every impact hurt, every movement cost him energy, and every mistake could mean actual death without respawn or second chances given freely. He channeled curse energy through his blade, letting it flow into the creature's form with each parry and block executed desperately in succession. The Shadewalker hissed, a sound like steam escaping from a ruptured pipe as the curse energy began affecting its shadowy composition visibly. Its movements slowed fractionally, the dark energy poisoning its essence in ways that physical damage never could against such ethereal creatures, naturally resistant otherwise. Kaido pressed his advantage, his training with Sora and Ryu kicking in automatically as muscle memory overrode conscious thought during intense combat engagement. He slid beneath a sweeping claw attack, his blade carving upward through the creature's ribcage with curse energy blazing dark purple along the edge. The Shadewalker shrieked, stumbling backward, but it didn't dissolve into harmless light particles like dungeon monsters did when defeated in normal circumstances. Instead, it reformed itself, the shadows knitting back together around its bone framework, healing the damage Kaito had inflicted within mere seconds elapsed. Of course it regenerates, Kaido muttered bitterly, recognizing that this fight would require more than simple hack-and-slash tactics to overcome successfully. He needed to think, to analyze the creature's patterns, to find a weakness that curse energy alone couldn't exploit through brute application. The Shadewalker charged again, its movements more cautious now, having learned to respect the cursed blade's ability to harm it effectively despite regeneration. Kaito noticed something crucial in that moment of observation. The red glow emanated from a crystal embedded deep within its chest cavity. That had to be its core, the source of its regeneration, and possibly its connection to this place that kept it animated and functional. But reaching it would require getting past those claws and the shadowy tendrils that writhed around its body like living serpents protecting their host. Kaito made a decision, risky but necessary given the circumstances and his limited options available in this confined space without backup support present. He charged forward instead of defending, surprising the Shadewalker with his sudden aggression that contradicted typical cautious adventurer behavior patterns usually observed. The creature's claws raked across his shoulder, tearing through cloth and skin, sending pain lancing through his body with shocking intensity felt immediately. But Kaito ignored it, gritting his teeth, driving his cursed blade forward with all his strength channeled through the weapon toward the target identified. The blade pierced the Shadewalker's chest, plunging deep, and Kaito released every bit of curse energy he could muster directly into the core. The crystal cracked, then shattered, and the creature's shriek reached a pitch that made Kaito's ears ring painfully as it echoed endlessly around them. The Shadewalker collapsed, its form dissolving not into light but into black smoke that dissipated slowly, leaving behind only scattered bones. Kaito fell to one knee, breathing heavily, his shoulder bleeding freely from the wound received during his reckless final attack executed successfully. He tore a strip from his shirt, binding the wound clumsily with one hand while keeping his blade ready in case more enemies appeared. The corridor remained silent except for his labored breathing and the steady drip of blood falling from his makeshift bandage onto stone below. First room cleared, he said to himself, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy through familiar dungeon-clearing protocols spoken aloud reassuringly. But this was nothing like the dungeons above, nothing like the safe, controlled environments where death was merely a temporary inconvenience at worst. Here, death was final, and Kaito had just learned that lesson viscerally through the very real pain radiating from his wounded shoulder constantly. He stood slowly, testing his mobility, relieved to find that while painful, the wound wasn't debilitating enough to prevent him from continuing onward. The corridor ahead branched into 3 paths, each one equally dark and uninviting, offering no clear indication of which direction led toward progression. Kaito closed his eyes, extending his senses, trying to feel the flow of mana in this place that was clearly saturated with magical energy. The rightmost path pulsed with something that felt wrong, twisted, like curse energy but far more malevolent and ancient than anything he recognized. The center path felt empty, almost too empty, as if something was deliberately masking its presence to appear harmless when it was anything but safe. The left path called to him with a strange resonance, something in the energy signature that matched the frequency of his own curse abilities. He chose the left path, trusting his instincts and the affinity he felt, hoping it would lead him deeper rather than into a dead end. The corridor sloped downward gradually, the temperature dropping further with each step taken deeper into whatever lay beneath this impossible dungeon's entrance level. Strange markings covered the walls now, glowing faintly with that same red light, and Kaito recognized them as seals meant to contain something powerful. What is this place? He wondered aloud, his voice swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to resist sound itself from propagating far. Luna had called it the Undervault, a place where real power was kept hidden, but that explanation raised more questions than it answered. If monsters like the Shadewalker existed here, preserved somehow when they should have been extinct, what else lurked in these depths waiting? The corridor opened into a vast chamber, easily 100 meters across, with a ceiling lost in darkness high above his current position below. In the center of the chamber stood a monument of some kind, a pillar of black stone covered in the same ceiling symbols observed earlier. Kaito approached cautiously, his blade ready, expecting ambush or trap to spring from the shadows surrounding this obvious focal point of interest. But nothing attacked as he drew closer, and the silence became even more oppressive than before, weighing down on him like physical pressure. The pillar hummed with power, and as Kaido circled it, he noticed something embedded in its surface at roughly chest height to himself. A sword, or rather, the hilt and guard of a sword, the blade itself seeming to merge with the pillar as if it was part of the structure. The design was ancient, predating any weapon style Kaido had studied, but something about it called to him with an urgency that was almost painful. His hand moved toward it without conscious decision, drawn by that resonance he had felt in the corridor, amplified now to an almost unbearable degree. "Don't touch that," a voice commanded from the darkness, and Kaido spun around to find Luna standing at the chamber's entrance watching him. "Why not?" Kaido asked, his hand still extended toward the weapon, the pull so strong now that resisting it took conscious effort sustained. Luna walked forward slowly, her expression unreadable in the dim red light that illuminated the chamber from sources Kaido couldn't identify clearly anywhere. "Because that is the sword of severing," she said quietly, "and it will either make you into something extraordinary or destroy you utterly completely. Every person who has tried to claim it in the last 300 years has died screaming as it consumed their essence," she continued matter-of-factly. "But you're different," she added, stopping a few meters away and studying him with those unsettling golden eyes that saw too much always, somehow. "You carry the bloodline, diluted after so many generations, but still present, still calling to the weapon that once belonged to your ancestor originally." Kaito's mind reeled at the implication of her words, connections forming between disparate pieces of information he had never considered before, ever consciously. "My ancestor?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper as the implications of that statement began to sink in slowly but surely, inevitably. Luna nodded, and for the first time since meeting her, Kaito saw something like respect in her expression as she regarded him seriously. "Akira, the hero who defeated the Demon King 300 years ago, the one whose statue you were standing before when I found you earlier. That was your ancestor, many generations removed, but the blood still flows in your veins, even if weakened significantly by time's passage always." Kaido thought back to the statue, to the times he had stood before it seeking answers, never imagining he was related to that legendary hero. "The cursed blade class," Luna continued, "isn't a curse at all despite what people believe and what the name suggests to the uninformed masses. It's a fragment of Akira's original power, diluted and misunderstood by modern oracles who don't remember what it truly represented in ancient times. Akira didn't just defeat the Demon King with raw strength or spirit magic," she explained, gesturing toward the pillar and the sword within. "He wielded the power to sever connections, to cut through magical bonds, to end curses and blessings alike with a single decisive strike executed perfectly. That's what the Sword of Severing does, and that's what your class is trying to be but cannot fully achieve without the proper weapon." Kaito stared at the sword hilt, understanding dawning like a terrible sunrise revealing truths he had been blind to his entire life thus far. "Why tell me this?" he asked, turning back to Luna with suspicion still present despite the revelation she had shared with him here tonight. "Why bring me here? Why reveal all this? What do you gain from helping me unlock whatever power this sword supposedly contains within?" Luna smiled, but it was a sad expression, filled with regrets and memories of things long past that Kaido couldn't begin to understand or guess. "Because the world is changing," she said softly, "and the entertainment dungeons that keep everyone safe and comfortable won't last much longer than expected. True monsters are stirring in the deep places, ancient things that should have died with the Demon King but merely slept instead of perishing. The seals are weakening, and when they break, humanity will need true heroes again, not performers playing a danger for audience entertainment's sake. You have the potential to become that hero," she finished, meeting his eyes directly with intensity that was almost painful to endure for long. "But only if you claim your birthright and accept everything that comes with it, the power and the burden both together, inseparably forever onward." Kaido turned back to the sword, his heart pounding, every instinct screaming conflicting messages about danger and opportunities simultaneously presenting themselves urgently. "If I die trying," he said slowly, "what happens to Sora and Ryu? What happens to everyone depending on adventurers to keep them safe?" Luna was quiet for a moment before answering, and when she spoke, her voice carried weight that suggested ancient knowledge beyond her apparent age. If you die, then I find another candidate, and another, until someone succeeds, or until the seals break and it's too late to matter. But if you succeed, she added, then you become strong enough to protect everyone, strong enough that no monster will threaten those you care about. It was a gamble, Kaito realized, the biggest gamble of his life, but also the chance he had been unconsciously searching for all along. Not just to prove himself to others, but to become something that mattered, something that could make a real difference when it truly counted. He reached out and grasped the sword's hilt firmly, and the world exploded into pain beyond anything he had ever imagined possible before this moment. Energy poured into him through the weapon, ancient and powerful and utterly merciless in its examination of his worthiness to wield such force freely. Kaito screamed, his voice echoing endlessly in the vast chamber as the sword judged him, searching through his memories and his soul itself. It saw his failures, every rejection, every moment of weakness, every time he had doubted himself or considered giving up entirely on his dreams. But it also saw his determination, his refusal to quit despite everything, his loyalty to those who had given him a chance when nobody else would. The sword saw Sora's amber eyes and Ryu's encouraging smile, saw the faces of every person who had ever believed in him, however slightly over time. And finally, it saw the statue of Akira, saw the moment when young Kaito had sworn to become a hero worthy of that legacy someday somehow. The pain reached a crescendo, and Kaito felt something break inside him, some limitation he hadn't even known existed until it shattered completely irreparably. Then the pain was gone, replaced by a clarity of vision and purpose that was almost transcendent in its intensity and focus achieved suddenly. The sword came free from the pillar with a sound like thunder, and Kaito held it aloft, its blade gleaming with dark purple energy. Luna watched with a smile of genuine satisfaction, her golden eyes reflecting the sword's glow as Kaito stood transformed before her, watching carefully. "Welcome, true heir of Akira," she said formally, bowing properly for the first time since they met earlier that evening in the Memorial Plaza. "Welcome to your birthright, and to the responsibility that comes with power that can shape the fate of nations and civilizations entire, potentially forever." Kaito looked at the sword in his hand, feeling the connection between them, knowing instinctively how to use its power to sever anything completely. "What now?" he asked, his voice stronger than before, carrying a confidence he had never possessed until this transformative moment just experienced fully. Luna straightened from her bow, and her expression became businesslike once more, the brief moment of reverence passing quickly back to practical matters. "Now you train," she said firmly, "because having the sword doesn't mean you know how to use it effectively yet in real combat situations. You'll stay here in the Undervault, fighting true monsters, learning to control your newfound power before it consumes you instead of serving you. When you're ready," she continued, "you'll return to the surface, and you'll face a choice about what kind of hero you want to be ultimately." Kaito nodded slowly, understanding that he had just committed himself to a path far more difficult than simply choosing between the Crimson Fangs and others. He had chosen to become something the world hadn't seen in 3 centuries, and that choice would demand everything he had to give and more. "How long will the training take?" he asked, thinking of Sora and Ryu, of the 3 days remaining on his contract with them currently. Luna shrugged elegantly, a gesture that seemed both casual and significant simultaneously in ways hard to articulate or explain properly to others later. "Time flows differently here in the Undervault," she said. "What feels like months here might be only days above, or vice versa unpredictably. But don't worry about your friends," she added with a knowing smile. "They'll be fine, and you'll see them again when you're ready." Kaito wasn't entirely reassured by that statement, but he had made his choice, and there was no point in second-guessing himself now after committing. "Then let's begin," he said, raising the sword of severing, feeling its power thrumming through his body like a second heartbeat synchronized perfectly. Luna's smile widened, and she snapped her fingers, and the chamber began to change around them as walls shifted and new corridors appeared suddenly. "Your first lesson," she announced, "is learning that the sword doesn't make you invincible, only capable of facing what was previously impossible to overcome." From the newly formed passages emerged more Shade Walkers, at least a dozen of them, their red eyes fixed upon Kaito with predatory hunger. "Survive this," Luna said, fading back into the shadows. "And we'll discuss lesson 2 when you're finished here, successfully defeating them all." Then she was gone, and Kaito was alone with the monsters, the sword of severing in his hand, and a newfound power he barely understood. The Shadewalkers rushed forward as one, and Kaito moved to meet them, his blades singing through the air with purpose and precision born of necessity. This was his path now, the one he had chosen, and he would walk it to its end, wherever that might lead him eventually through trials ahead. The sound of battle filled the chamber once more, and somewhere far above, in the world of safe dungeons and entertainment, his friends went on without him. But Kaito didn't think about that now, couldn't afford to, because survival demanded his complete attention and focus on the present moment only, always. He fought and learned and grew stronger with each enemy defeated, each near-death experience survived by the narrowest margins possible in combat, intense. Days blurred into weeks in the Undervault, or perhaps it was hours that felt like months, time having lost all conventional meaning here. Kaito sat against a cold stone wall, his body covered in wounds that had already begun healing at an accelerated rate he didn't understand. The sword of severing lay across his lap, its dark purple glow providing the only illumination in this rest chamber Luna had shown him. His training had been brutal beyond anything he could have imagined, fighting monsters that shouldn't exist against odds that defied rational survival calculations. Yet he was still alive, still breathing, and somehow growing stronger with each impossible battle he managed to survive through sheer determination and adaptation. Luna appeared from the shadows as she always did, materializing without sound or warning, her golden eyes studying him with that analytical gaze constantly. "You're progressing faster than I anticipated," she observed, settling gracefully onto a stone outcropping nearby with inhuman fluidity of movement displayed effortlessly. "Your body is remembering what your bloodline once knew, awakening abilities that have been dormant for generations, waiting for this moment precisely." Kaito looked up at her, exhaustion evident in every line of his face, despite the healing occurring within his damaged body continuously. "How much longer?" he asked, his voice hoarse from screaming during the last battle against a creature Luna had called a dreadworm. Luna tilted her head, considering the question with an expression that suggested she was calculating variables he couldn't even begin to comprehend fully. "Until you can sever the chains," she said cryptically, gesturing towards something in the darkness beyond the chamber's illumination provided by his sword. Kaito followed her gesture and noticed for the first time massive chains hanging from the ceiling, disappearing into darkness above and below both. "What are they binding?" he asked, though part of him feared the answer even as curiosity demanded he learn the truth regardless. Luna's expression grew serious, more so than he had ever seen before, and that alone was enough to send a chill down his spine. "The Demon King," she said simply, and the words hung in the air like a death sentence pronounced upon the world itself potentially. Kaito's blood ran cold, his hand instinctively tightening on the sword of severing as if it could protect him from the implications of those words. "The Demon King is dead," he said, repeating what every history text claimed, what every child was taught from their earliest lessons about the world. "Akira killed him 300 years ago, ended the Age of Darkness. That's why we have peace now. That's what everyone knows for certain." Luna shook her head slowly, her silver hair catching the purple light in ways that seemed almost supernatural in their luminescence displayed beautifully. "Akira couldn't kill him," she corrected gently. "The Demon King was too powerful, too ancient, his existence too deeply woven into the world's fabric. So instead, Akira sealed him here, in the deepest part of the Undervault, bound by chains forged from his own life force sacrificed willingly. Those chains have held for 3 centuries, she continued, but they're weakening now, eroding slowly as the power sustaining them fades with time's passage." Kaito felt his mouth go dry, as the true scope of what Luna was preparing him for became horrifyingly clear to his understanding suddenly. "You want me to strengthen the seal," he said, hoping that was the answer, praying it was something that simple and straightforward to accomplish. But Luna's expression told him otherwise before she even spoke the words that confirmed his deepest fears about what she intended from him ultimately. "No," she said softly, "I want you to do what Akira couldn't, to use the Sword of Severing to end the Demon King permanently completely." "That's insane!" Kaito said flatly, standing despite his wounds, anger flaring hot in his chest at the impossible task being laid before him casually. I've been training for weeks, maybe months, I don't even know anymore, but I'm nowhere near strong enough to face a Demon King. Akira was the greatest hero in history, and even he could only seal the monster. How could I possibly hope to succeed where he failed? Luna remained calm in the face of his outbursts, waiting patiently for him to exhaust his protests before responding to his very reasonable objections raised. Akira didn't have the completed Sword of Severing, she explained once Kaito had fallen silent, breathing heavily from his emotional eruption just expressed. He forged it during his final battle, used it to create the seal, but he died before fully awakening its true potential locked within. You, however, have been chosen by the blade itself, she continued, standing and approaching him with deliberate steps that echoed in the chamber. It recognized your worthiness, accepted you as its wielder, and that means you have the potential to surpass even Akira himself given proper training. But potential isn't enough, Kaito argued, though his voice had lost some of its earlier heat as logic warred with emotion inside him. Luna nodded in agreement, surprising him by conceding his point rather than arguing against it as he had expected her to do. Which is why your training isn't finished, she said. You've learned to fight, to survive, to channel the sword's power in basic ways effectively. But you haven't yet learned what the Sword of Severing truly is, what it means to cut through the bonds that connect all things. She gestured, and the chamber transformed around them, the walls dissolving to reveal a vast space filled with threads of light connecting everything. Kaito gasped, seeing the world in a way he never had before, perceiving the invisible connections that bound reality together in intricate patterns. Everything is connected, Luna explained, her voice taking on a teacher's cadence as she guided his new perception with careful words chosen precisely. People to places, objects to emotions, past to future, cause to effect, these threads represent the bonds that give the world structure and meaning. The Sword of Severing can cut any of these threads, she continued, and Kaito saw the weapon in his hand pulse in response to her words. It can end a curse by severing the connection between caster and victim, can break an enchantment, can even cut the thread binding a soul. That's how you'll defeat the Demon King, she finished, not by overpowering him, but by severing his connection to existence itself permanently forever. Kaito stared at the threads surrounding them, his mind reeling from the implications of what Luna was teaching him about his weapon's true nature. But if I can sever any connection, he said slowly, working through the logic, couldn't I accidentally cut something important, destroy something vital unintentionally? Luna's expression turned grave, and she met his eyes with an intensity that made him want to look away but forced himself to maintain contact. Yes, she said bluntly. The Sword of Severing is the most dangerous weapon ever forged precisely because of that potential for catastrophic misuse accidentally. Akira understood this, which is why he built safeguards into the blade, limitations that prevent it from cutting certain threads without deliberate intent focused. But those safeguards aren't perfect, she warned, and in the heat of battle, mistakes can happen with consequences that ripple across reality itself. Kaito felt the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders like a physical burden, heavier than anything he had carried before in life. Why me? He asked again, the question that had haunted him since Luna first appeared in the Memorial Plaza, what felt like lifetimes ago now. Why not find someone stronger, more experienced, someone who wouldn't need so much training to become what you need them to be ultimately? Luna was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried emotions. Kaito hadn't heard from her before this moment precisely. Because I've tried, she admitted. For 50 years, I've searched for someone with Akira's bloodline strong enough to wield the sword successfully without dying. Dozens have attempted the trial you survived, and all of them died when the blade judged them unworthy and consumed their essence as payment. You're the first in half a century to be accepted, she said, and Kaito heard something like relief in her voice underneath the information. The first with enough of Akira's determination, his refusal to give up even when facing impossible odds that would break normal people's spirits. I don't feel that strong, Kaito confessed, looking down at the sword in his hands, at the weapon that had chosen him for reasons. Luna laughed, a genuine sound without her usual mockery or distance, and it transformed her face into something almost human for that brief moment. Akira said the same thing, she revealed, right before he marched into the Demon King's fortress to end the Age of Darkness permanently. He was terrified, convinced he would fail, certain that stronger heroes should have been sent instead of him, despite his proven abilities many times. But he went anyway, she continued, because someone had to, because people were dying, because running away would have meant abandoning everything he cared about. That's what makes a true hero, Luna finished. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it when action is necessary regardless. Kaito absorbed her words, feeling something shift inside him, a settling of purpose that had been uncertain until this moment of clarity achieved finally. "How long until the seal breaks?" he asked, no longer protesting, accepting the path laid before him as his responsibility to walk regardless. Luna's expression grew troubled, and she looked up toward where the chains disappeared into darkness above them, both standing together here presently. "Months, maybe a year if we're lucky," she said. "The deterioration is accelerating as the Demon King's consciousness begins to wake from its slumber. He knows someone is training to face him," she added, "can sense the sword of severing being wielded again after 3 centuries of silence. He's fighting against the chains now, actively trying to break free rather than simply sleeping and waiting for time to erode them naturally." The implications were clear. Kaito's training had a deadline, and every day counted toward either salvation or apocalypse for the world above, unknowing completely. "Then we continue," Kaito said firmly, raising the sword of severing, its blade humming with power, responding to his renewed determination and resolve focused. Luna smiled, and this time it reached her golden eyes, transforming her from mysterious guide into someone who genuinely believed in him and his potential. "Good," she said, "because the next phase of your training will make everything so far seem like a pleasant warm-up by direct comparison experienced." She gestured again, and the thread-filled space transformed once more, becoming a training ground filled with targets connected by visible bonds of light. "You need to learn precision," Luna instructed. "All business now," the teacher returned after the brief moment of vulnerability shared between them just now. "Anyone can swing a sword and sever threads randomly, but you must learn to cut only what you intend to cut precisely without error. One mistake when facing the Demon King," she warned, "and you could sever the wrong connection, perhaps even cut the thread holding reality together." Kaito swallowed hard but nodded, understanding the stakes and the level of control required for what Luna was asking him to achieve ultimately. For hours that stretched into days he practiced, learning to perceive threads, to identify which ones were safe to cut and which were essential. Luna proved to be a demanding instructor, accepting nothing less than perfection, punishing mistakes with additional exercises that left Kaito exhausted, completely mentally drained. But gradually, painfully, he improved, his strikes becoming more precise, his perception of the threads sharpening until he could distinguish individual bonds instinctively. He learned to sever curses without harming their victims, to break enchantments while leaving the underlying objects intact and functional as before. He practiced cutting the bonds between summoned creatures and their masters, sending monsters back to wherever they originated from safely without killing them. "Excellent!" Luna praised after Kaito successfully severed a particularly complex web of connections without damaging any essential threads nearby, simultaneously targeted carefully. "You're ready for the next stage," she declared, and the training ground dissolved, replaced by a corridor leading downward into even deeper darkness below. "What's down there?" Kaito asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer based on the direction they were heading toward, deliberately chosen specifically. "A test," Luna replied cryptically, "against something that will push you closer to the limits of your current abilities than anything you faced yet." They descended in silence, the temperature dropping with each step, frost forming on the walls in patterns that looked almost intentional in their geometric precision. The corridor opened into another massive chamber, this one dominated by a frozen lake that stretched beyond the range of even the sword's illumination. In the center of the lake stood a figure encased in ice, humanoid but clearly not human, based on proportions visible through translucent prison. "A general of the Demon King's army," Luna explained, "sealed here by Akira after the final battle to prevent his resurrection and return to power. He's been frozen for 300 years, she continued, his consciousness suspended, his power locked away behind barriers of ice and magic, both combined. "You're going to free him," she finished, and Kaito's head snapped toward her in shock at the insane proposal just made so casually stated. "Are you insane?" Kaito demanded. "Why would we release one of the Demon King's generals when we're trying to prevent his return to the world?" Luna's smile was sharp, predatory, and Kaito realized this was exactly the reaction she had anticipated from him based on personality assessment done over time. "Because you need to face an opponent at that level before confronting the Demon King himself," she explained with maddening logical patience displayed infuriatingly. This general, his name was Mordrin, was considered one of the strongest beings of his age aside from the Demon King himself, she elaborated further. "If you can defeat him now, in his weakened state after centuries of imprisonment, you'll know you're ready for the final trial ahead." "And if I can't?" Kaito asked, though he already knew that answer too, based on how Luna had structured every previous test so far experienced. "Then you die," Luna said simply, "and I search for another candidate while the seal continues to weaken and eventually breaks regardless of our efforts." Kaito looked at the frozen figure in the center of the lake, at the test Luna was placing before him without any real choice offered. "You're a terrible teacher," he muttered, but he was already walking forward onto the ice, the sword of severing held ready in his grip. Luna's laughter followed him across the frozen surface, echoing strangely in the vast chamber as Kaito approached his next challenge without hesitation now committed. He reached the ice pillar and examined the threads connecting it to the magical seal maintaining the general's imprisonment for 3 long centuries past. With careful precision learned through countless hours of practice, Kaito began severing those threads one by one, unraveling the seal methodically and carefully executed properly. The ice cracked, then shattered, and Mordrin fell forward, catching himself with one hand, his red eyes opening for the first time in 300 years. "Finally," the demon general rasped, his voice like grinding stones. "I thought I would be frozen forever, trapped in that prison until time's very end eventually." He stood slowly, his body covered in ancient armor that had somehow survived the centuries intact, despite everything, looking exactly as designed, still perfectly. Mordrin's gaze fixed on Kaito, and something like recognition flickered in those ancient red eyes that had witnessed the fall of civilizations past. "You carry Akira's sword," Mordrin observed, "and his scent, diluted but present, which means you're his descendant come to finish what he started long ago." "I've come to test myself," Kaito replied, raising the sword of severing into a guard position learned from Luna's brutal training regimen followed strictly. Mordrin smiled, revealing fangs that gleamed in the purple light, and drew his own weapon, a massive blade that seemed forged from darkness itself. "Then test yourself, young hero," the demon general said, "and let's see if you're worthy of that sword, or if you'll die screaming like the others." The 2 warriors charged simultaneously, their blades meeting in the center of the frozen lake with impact that cracked the ice beneath their feet. The real battle had begun, and somewhere in the darkness, Luna watched with golden eyes that reflected both hope and terrible uncertainty about the outcome. The clash of blades echoed through the frozen chamber like thunder, each impact sending spiderweb cracks spreading across the ancient ice beneath their feet. Mordrin fought with the experience of countless battles, his movements economical and precise, wasting no energy on flourishes or unnecessary motion at all. Kaito barely managed to parry the demon general's strikes, each blow carrying enough force to shatter stone, his arms aching from the repeated impacts absorbed. "Is this the best Akira's bloodline can produce?" Mordrin taunted, his voice calm despite the intensity of their exchange continuing without pause between them. 300 years, and humanity has grown weak, soft, fighting, pretend battles in safe dungeons for the entertainment of cowards watching above safely. The words stung because they carried truth that Kaito couldn't deny, even as he struggled to maintain his defense against the relentless assault being delivered. He tried to sever the threads connecting Mordrin to his weapon, but the demon general's control over his equipment was absolute, unbreakable through simple cuts. "You can see the threads," Mordrin observed, his red eyes narrowing with interest as he noticed Kaito's attempts to use the sword's special ability. "Luna taught you that much at least, though perception without the skill to exploit it is just another form of weakness ultimately shown clearly." Mordrin's blade swept low, forcing Kaito to jump back, his footing slipping on the ice for just a moment that nearly proved fatal in consequence. The demon general's follow-up strike came instantly, and Kaito barely managed to interpose his sword, the impact driving him to one knee painfully hard. "You're afraid," Mordrin stated, pressing his advantage, raining blows down upon Kaito's defense with methodical brutality that couldn't be sustained indefinitely by anyone mortal. "I can smell your fear, taste it in the air. You're fighting because you have to, not because you believe you can actually win this." Kaito gritted his teeth, refusing to respond, focusing everything on defense as his mind raced to find some weakness he could possibly exploit successfully. But Mordrin had no openings. 300 years of experience translated into a fighting style so refined that it approached absolute perfection in execution. A particularly vicious strike knocked the Sword of Severing from Kaito's grip, sending it skittering across the ice away from his desperate reaching hand extended. Mordrin's blade came down toward Kaito's neck, and time seemed to slow as death approached with the inevitability of a falling guillotine blade descending. Kaito rolled desperately to the side, the demon general's weapon missing by mere centimeters, close enough that he felt its passage through air displaced. He scrambled toward his sword, but Mordrin was faster, kicking the weapon further away with casual ease that demonstrated complete control over the battle's flow. "This is disappointing," Mordrin said, stalking toward Kaito like a predator approaching wounded prey that couldn't possibly escape now regardless of struggling attempts. "I expected more from someone Luna deemed worthy of wielding Akira's greatest creation, yet you're barely worth the effort of killing properly executed." Kaito's hand touched something cold beneath the ice, and he realized with sudden clarity what Luna had intended all along with this particular test given. The threads weren't just visible connections between objects and people, they were everywhere, connecting everything to everything else in an infinite web of causality. The ice beneath them was connected to the water below, which was connected to the stone, which was connected to the chamber itself fundamentally. If he couldn't sever Mordrin's threads directly, perhaps he could cut the threads supporting the demon general instead, collapsing the battlefield itself beneath him. Kaito focused, perceiving the web of connections maintaining the frozen lake's structural integrity across its entire surface area, spanning the chamber before them. He didn't have his sword, but Luna had taught him that the weapon was merely a focus, that the true power resided in his bloodline awakened. Kaito pressed his palm against the ice and channeled every bit of energy he could muster into severing the threads holding the lake together underneath. The effect was immediate and catastrophic, the entire frozen surface shattering into millions of fragments that plunged both fighters into freezing water below suddenly without warning. Mordrin's eyes widened in genuine surprise, perhaps the first time in centuries that anyone had caught him completely off guard with unexpected tactics employed desperately. Kaito swam through the frigid water toward where he had seen his sword fall, his lungs already burning from the cold and lack of air. His fingers closed around the familiar hilt just as Mordrin's hand grabbed his ankle with crushing force, pulling him deeper into the dark water below. The demon general's face showed fury now, his earlier calm replaced by genuine anger at being caught by such a crude but effective tactic utilized successfully. Kaito twisted, swinging the Sword of Severing in a wide arc underwater, and this time he cut the threads connecting Mordrin to the water itself. The demon general suddenly found himself unable to move through the liquid, as if it had turned solid around him without actually freezing into ice. Kaito broke free and kicked toward the surface, gasping as his head emerged into air, his body trembling from cold and exertion, both combined overwhelmingly. He pulled himself onto a surviving fragment of ice large enough to support his weight, coughing up water while maintaining his grip on the sword. Below, Mordrin struggled against the severed connections, his strength useless against a problem that wasn't about force, but about fundamental bonds of reality being cut. Gradually, the demon general stopped struggling, his red eyes focusing on Kaito with an expression that might have been respect, grudgingly given after resistance ended. The water accepted Mordrin again as Kaito released his hold on the severed threads, allowing the demon general to surface nearby on another ice fragment. "Clever," Mordrin admitted, his voice carrying approval despite his defeat being now inevitable given the circumstances created by Kaito's desperate gambits successfully executed. "You fought like Akira did, not with overwhelming power, but with intelligence, using the environment and your abilities in ways I didn't anticipate from someone." "Does that mean you yield?" Kaito asked, his teeth chattering from the cold, barely able to hold his sword steady anymore due to exhaustion setting in. Mordrin laughed, a sound that echoed through the chamber with genuine amusement rather than mockery or disdain. This time around, surprisingly shown openly without reservation. "Yield? No, boy, I don't yield," he said, "but I acknowledge your victory, which is perhaps more valuable to you than simple surrender would be." The demon general's form began to shimmer, becoming translucent, fading slowly as if he was never truly there in the first place at all somehow. "Luna's tricks," Mordrin explained, seeing Kaito's confusion. "I was never fully resurrected, just a shadow given temporary form to test you without actual risk of escaping. The real me is still sealed elsewhere, waiting for the Demon King to break free and release all of us from our various prisons scattered throughout. But know this," Mordrin continued, his voice growing fainter as his form continued dissolving into nothing before Kaito's watching eyes witnessing it directly firsthand. "When we meet again, and we will meet again, I won't be a weakened shadow, but a true demon general at full strength regained completely. Train hard, young hero," were his final words, "because the enemies you'll face when the seal breaks will make this test seem like child's play." Then Mordrin was gone completely, leaving Kaito alone on the ice fragment in the middle of freezing water, shivering and barely conscious from exertion. Luna appeared on the shore, walking across the water's surface as if it was solid ground, her expression unreadable as she approached him floating there. "You passed," she said simply, reaching down to pull him from the water with surprising strength for her slender frame displayed effortlessly without apparent strain shown. Kaito wanted to respond, to ask if she had really expected him to figure out that solution, but exhaustion claimed him before words could form. He woke later in the rest chamber, wrapped in warm blankets that hadn't been there before, the sword of severing resting within arm's reach beside him. Luna sat nearby, and for once she looked tired, the golden glow in her eyes dimmed slightly, as if maintaining these trials cost her more. "How long was I unconscious?" Kaito asked, his voice rough, his body aching in ways that suggested significant healing had occurred while he slept through it. "2 days, Luna replied. "Your body needed time to recover from the hypothermia and the energy expenditure required for that final move you executed." 2 days, Kaito repeated, anxiety flaring as he thought about the timeline, about how much time they had left before the seal broke completely forever. Luna seemed to read his thoughts, her expression softening slightly as she addressed his unspoken concern directly without prompting needed from him at all now. "Time still flows differently here," she reminded him. "Those 2 days were perhaps hours in the world above, maybe less, impossible to measure accurately enough. But your training is nearly complete," she added. "You've learned to perceive threads, to sever them with precision, to think creatively under pressure applied intensely." "What's left?" Kaito asked, sitting up despite his body's protests, driven by the need to finish what he had started here in this impossible place below. Luna stood, walking to the chamber's edge where darkness waited beyond the purple light cast by his sword resting nearby within his easy reach, always maintained. "The final lesson," she said quietly. "The one Akira never learned because he ran out of time before completing his training to face his destiny ahead. You need to learn to sever your own threads," she explained, turning back to face him with an intensity that demanded his complete attention focused entirely. "Everyone is bound by connections to their past, their fears, their limitations, beliefs about what they can and cannot do in any given situation faced. These threads are invisible even to those who can see all other connections clearly, because they're internal, woven into the very fabric of self-identity maintained. But they're real," she continued, "and they hold you back, prevent you from accessing your full potential locked away behind barriers you've constructed yourself unconsciously." Kaito understood intellectually what she meant, but the practical application seemed impossible to grasp fully enough to execute successfully in reality when attempted seriously. "How do I sever threads I can't see?" he asked, the logical problem presenting itself immediately as an insurmountable obstacle to overcome somehow regardless. Luna smiled, and it was a gentle expression, almost motherly, so different from her usual demeanor that it startled Kaito completely with its unexpected warmth. "By accepting that they exist," she said, "and by choosing to let them go consciously and deliberately with full awareness of the action being taken." She gestured, and the chamber filled once more with visible threads, But these were different, connecting Kaido to memories visible in the air around him. He saw himself as a child, declaring he would become a hero, saw the Oracle pronouncing his class as Cursed Blade, with disappointed expressions following immediately. He saw the rejections from parties, the mockery from other adventurers, the way people looked at him with pity or contempt depending on their nature. He saw Sora finding him in the training yard, saw Ryu joining their party, saw every victory and defeat they had shared over their time together. And he saw the statue of Akira, saw himself standing before it countless times, asking for guidance that never came from cold stone lips sealed. "These are your threads," Luna explained. "The connections to experiences that shaped you, that made you doubt yourself, that convinced you of your limitations believed." "Some of them are positive," she acknowledged. "The bond with your friends, the memory of your dream, these give you strength when properly understood and utilized. But others are chains," she said firmly. "The rejection, the doubt, the fear that you're not enough, these hold you back from your true potential. You need to sever the negative threads while keeping the positive ones," she instructed, "to cut away what weakens without losing what strengthens you ultimately." Kaido stared at the web of his own history displayed before him, seeing his life lay bare in ways that made him feel vulnerable and exposed. "I don't know how," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, the task seeming impossibly complex and terrifyingly personal to attempt executing successfully somehow. Luna placed a hand on his shoulder, and for the first time since meeting her, the touch felt genuinely warm and comforting rather than calculated. "Start with one," she advised. "Choose a thread that clearly hurts you, that serves no purpose except to diminish your confidence and self-worth maintained internally." Kaido focused on a specific memory, a rejection from a party leader who had called him worthless, had said cursed blades were mistakes of fate. The thread connecting him to that memory pulsed red in his perception, angry and painful, a wound that had never fully healed over the years. He raised his hand, focusing his will, and imagined severing that connection cleanly and completely without damaging anything else around it, carefully executed. The thread snapped, and the memory faded, not disappearing but losing its emotional power, becoming just information rather than a source of pain felt. Relief washed through Kaido, and he found himself breathing easier, as if a weight he hadn't known he was carrying had suddenly been lifted completely. "Good," Luna encouraged. "Now another, and another, until you've cut away all the threads that bind you to self-doubt and fear of inadequacy experienced." For hours, Kaido worked through his memories, severing the connections to experiences that had wounded him, that had made him question his worth and value. Some threads were harder to cut than others, some tied to moments so painful that even looking at them made him want to turn away entirely. But he persisted, driven by Luna's guidance and by his own growing understanding of how much these old wounds had been holding him back, always. Finally, he stood in a web that was significantly simpler, cleaner, with only the threads that connected him to positive experiences and meaningful relationships remaining intact. "How do you feel?" Luna asked, and Kaido realized she genuinely wanted to know, wasn't just asking as part of the lesson being taught here now. "Lighter," he said, testing the word, finding it accurate despite seeming inadequate to describe the profound change he felt internally manifesting throughout his entire being. "Like I've been carrying a mountain and didn't realize it until someone took the weight away completely, suddenly and unexpectedly without warning given beforehand at all." Luna nodded approvingly, and the chamber returned to normal, the visible threads disappearing, leaving only the two of them in the purple-lit space once again. "You're ready," she declared, and those two words carried more meaning than any speech she could have given about his progress achieved successfully through trials. "Ready for what exactly?" Kaido asked, though he suspected he knew, his stomach tightening with anticipation and lingering traces of fear despite his recent breakthrough. Luna's expression grew serious, and she looked upward toward where the massive chains still hung invisibly in the darkness above them, both standing together presently. "Ready to face the Demon King," she said. "Not now, not today, but when the seal breaks and he rises again to threaten everything." "You've learned everything I can teach you," she continued. "The rest will come from experience, from facing challenges I cannot predict or prepare you for adequately." What happens now? Kaito asked, feeling simultaneously eager to return to the surface and reluctant to leave this place where he had transformed so completely over time. Luna smiled, and this time it was tinged with sadness, as if she knew something he didn't about what awaited him in the world above waiting. Now you go back, she said, back to your friends, back to your life, back to the world that thinks dungeons are entertainment and heroes are performers. But you'll be different, she warned. Stronger, yes, but also changed in ways that will make it hard to pretend nothing has happened to you here. People will notice, she added, especially those who are sensitive to power. They'll feel something different about you even if they can't identify what exactly changed recently. Kaito thought about Sora's perceptive amber eyes, about Ryu's ability to read people, wondered how he would explain where he had been without revealing everything. Can I tell them? He asked. About this place, about the Demon King, about what's coming when the seal breaks and everything changes forever? Luna considered the question carefully, her golden eyes distant as she weighed options and consequences invisible to Kaito, standing before her waiting for an answer. You can tell them some things, she decided finally, but not everything, not yet. The full truth would cause panic, chaos, destabilize the entire world prematurely. Tell them you found a secret training ground, she suggested, that you've been learning to better control your cursed blade abilities from a mysterious master encountered. It's not even a lie, she added with a slight smile, just an incomplete truth, which is sometimes the kindest option available when full honesty would harm. Kaito nodded, understanding the necessity even if he didn't like keeping secrets from the people who had given him a chance when nobody else would. When will I see you again? He asked, realizing that despite her harsh teaching methods, he had come to respect Luna deeply over their time together. Luna's expression softened once more, and she reached out to touch his cheek in a gesture that felt almost maternal despite her apparent youth displayed always. When the seal breaks, she said, I'll find you no matter where you are, and together we'll face what comes with everything we prepared for. Until then, she continued, stepping back and beginning to fade into silver light as she had when they first met in the Memorial Plaza before everything. Live your life, grow stronger through experience, treasure your friends, because when the darkness comes, they'll be the light that guides you through it all. Then she was gone, and Kaito stood alone in the chamber with only the sword of severing for company in the silence that followed her departure. The weapon pulsed once, as if acknowledging that their training together was complete, that they were now truly partners rather than wielder and tool used. Kaito took a deep breath, steadying himself, preparing for the transition back to the surface world he had left behind what felt like lifetimes ago now. He focused on the desire to return, and reality shifted around him in that now familiar sensation of space being twisted and reshaped by forces beyond understanding. When his vision cleared, he stood in the Memorial Plaza once more, the statue of Akira gazing down at him with stone eyes that seemed knowing somehow. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Kaito realized that Luna had been right about the time differential experienced. His contract with the Crimson Fang still had 2 days remaining before its expiration, meaning only a single day had passed above during his months below. Kaito looked down at his hands, at the sword of severing that now existed in the surface world rather than being bound to the undervault exclusively alone. The weapon had changed its appearance, he realized, now resembling his old cursed blade so perfectly that only he could see the difference in its true nature. Clever, he murmured, understanding that Luna had thought of everything, including how to hide such a powerful artifact from curious eyes that might ask questions inconvenient. He began walking toward the guild, toward his friends, toward a life that would never be quite the same after everything he had experienced recently. But Kaito found he was okay with that, found he was ready for whatever came next, because he was no longer the uncertain boy who had stood here yesterday. He was something more now, something stronger, and when the darkness came, he would be ready to face it with everything he had become through trials endured. The city of Argentum awakened around him, people beginning their daily routines, completely unaware that their world would soon change forever dramatically and completely. But Kaito knew, and that knowledge was both a burden and a purpose, driving him forward into an uncertain future with determination replacing the doubt he had severed. The guild hall was already bustling with activity when Kaito pushed through the heavy wooden doors. Adventurers gathered in groups discussing recent raids. He scanned the crowd for familiar faces, his enhanced perception making it almost overwhelming to see the threads connecting everyone to everything around them constantly. Taking a deep breath, Kaito consciously dimmed that vision, pulling back to normal sight the way Luna had taught him in their final lessons together. "Kaito!" Ryu's voice boomed across the hall, and Kaito turned to see his teammate waving from their usual table near the quest board posted prominently. Sora sat beside him, her amber eyes locking onto Kaito immediately, and he saw her expression shift from relief to confusion in rapid succession displayed. He approached their table, acutely aware of how different he must seem to them, even if the changes weren't immediately visible to casual observation made. "Where have you been?" Ryu demanded, though his tone was more concerned than angry, standing to clap Kaito on the shoulder with characteristic enthusiasm shown. "We've been trying to reach you for the entire day," Sora added, her eyes never leaving Kaito's face, studying him with that unnerving intensity unique. "I was training," Kaito replied, the partial truth Luna had suggested, settling into his seat with movements that felt more fluid than before somehow. "Training where?" Sora pressed, leaning forward, her instincts clearly telling her something significant had changed about her teammates standing before them both presently now. Kaito met her gaze steadily, no longer feeling the need to look away from that penetrating stare as he once would have automatically without thinking. "I found a secret location," he said carefully, "an old training ground with someone willing to teach me better control over my cursed blade abilities significantly." Ryu's eyebrows rose in interest, while Sora's expression remained skeptical, neither fully believing nor disbelieving his explanation given to them both together here now. "In one day?" Sora questioned. "You found a secret training ground and a mysterious master and learned enough to walk in here looking completely different somehow?" Kaito realized she was right to be suspicious, that his transformation was too profound to have occurred in the single day that had passed here. "Time moved differently there," he offered, which was absolutely true even if it sounded like a convenient excuse when spoken aloud to others listening carefully. "Like a dungeon's time dilation effect?" Ryu asked, nodding as if that explanation made perfect sense to him based on his understanding of magical phenomena. Some dungeons did possess unusual temporal properties, though they were rare and closely monitored by guild officials to prevent exploitation of that ability by anyone. "Something like that," Kaito agreed, grateful that Ryu had provided a framework that made his story more plausible without him needing to elaborate further unnecessarily. Sora remained silent, her eyes still fixed on him, and Kaito could almost feel her trying to unravel the truth hidden beneath his careful words. "You're stronger," she stated finally, not asking but confirming what her instincts were telling her about the change she sensed in him clearly without question. "I can feel it," she continued. "Your presence is different, heavier somehow, like you're carrying more weight than before but standing taller regardless of it." Kaito was impressed by her accuracy, unsurprised that Sora of all people would perceive the shift in his fundamental nature achieved through Luna's training recently. "I learned a lot," he said simply, "about myself, about my class, about what a cursed blade can actually do when properly trained and understood fully." "Show us," Ryu demanded enthusiastically, his face lighting up with the prospect of seeing new abilities demonstrated right here and now, without delay or hesitation given. Kaito hesitated, aware that revealing too much would raise questions he couldn't answer without exposing truth that needed to remain hidden for now. Still, "Not here," Sora interjected before Kaito could refuse. Too many eyes watching, too many people who would spread rumors about new techniques seen displayed publicly. She stood, shouldering her bow, and gestured toward the door leading to the guild's private training facilities reserved for registered parties, exclusively always available. "We have a practice room reserved for the next 2 hours," she explained. "We can test your new abilities there without an audience observing everything." Kaito nodded gratefully, following his teammates through the guild hall toward the training wing located in the building's eastern section designated specifically for this purpose. They entered a large chamber designed to withstand significant magical and physical punishment, walls reinforced with layers of protective enchantments woven throughout carefully. Sora sealed the door behind them and activated the privacy wards that would prevent sound from escaping and casual observation from penetrating inside here. "Now then," she said, turning to face Kaito with arms crossed, Show us what you learned from your mysterious master in your secret training ground. Kaido drew his sword, the weapon that appeared identical to his old cursed blade, but was actually the legendary Sword of Severing, disguised perfectly. He extended his perception, allowing himself to see the threads again, though he kept the full extent of his new vision carefully controlled and limited. I can perceive connections now, he explained, the bonds between things, the links that hold reality together in ways most people never see or understand. And I can sever them, he added, focusing on a training dummy across the room, seeing the threads connecting it to the floor below supporting. With a precise gesture, Kaido cut those specific threads and the dummy toppled over as if the ground had suddenly stopped supporting its weight entirely. Ryu whistled appreciatively, while Sora's eyes widened slightly, the only sign of surprise she allowed herself to display openly to others, watching her reactions closely, always. That's not just curse magic, Sora observed, approaching the fallen dummy to examine it for signs of conventional magical interference applied to it somehow. Curse magic weakens and debilitates, she continued, running her hand along the dummy's base. But this is different. You didn't weaken the connection to the ground. You removed it entirely, she finished, looking back at Kaito with an expression mixing awe and concern in equal measure displayed simultaneously without clear dominance. Kaito nodded, grateful that Sora understood the distinction even if she couldn't fully grasp the implications of what he had learned to do effectively now. My teacher called it severing, he explained, using Luna's terminology, cutting the threads that bind things together rather than just dampening their effects temporarily applied. That's incredible, Ryu breathed, his tactical mind already working through potential applications in combat situations faced during dungeon raids executed successfully together as team. If you can sever an enemy's connection to their weapon, he said excitedly, or to the ground, or to their own magic, that changes everything strategically. Sora remained more cautious, her expression thoughtful as she considered the broader implications of such an ability possessed by her teammate standing before her presently. This kind of power, she began carefully, people will notice it if you use it publicly in ranked dungeons broadcast to millions of viewers watching. They'll ask questions, she warned, about where you learned it, who taught you, whether others can learn it too from the same mysterious source encountered. Kaido had already considered this problem, had discussed it with Luna during their final conversation before returning to the surface world above where he belonged. I won't use the full extent of my abilities in public raids, he assured them both. I'll limit myself to techniques that look like advanced curse magic. The severing, he continued, that stays hidden except in emergencies where revealing it matters less than surviving the encounter faced immediately without time for consideration. Sora nodded slowly, apparently satisfied with his answer, though her eyes still held questions she wasn't asking yet for reasons known only to herself. There's something else you're not telling us, she stated flatly, not accusing but acknowledging the obvious fact that Kaito was withholding information deliberately from them both. Kaito met her gaze and made a decision in that moment, choosing to share a truth that might cost him their trust if handled poorly now. Something is coming, he said quietly, something that will change everything we know about dungeons and monsters and the safety we've taken for granted for centuries. Ryu's expression turned serious immediately, his earlier enthusiasm replaced by the focused attention of a warrior, hearing a credible threat described to him directly firsthand. What kind of something? He asked, his hand unconsciously moving to rest on his shield, as if expecting danger to manifest immediately in response. Kaito chose his words carefully, revealing enough to prepare them without causing the panic Luna had warned against if too much was said prematurely. The old monsters, he began, the ones from before dungeons became entertainment. They're not all dead despite what history books claim definitively without question aloud. Some were sealed rather than killed, he continued, and those seals are weakening after 300 years of holding them contained beneath the surface world. When they break, he finished, his voice heavy with the weight of knowledge he couldn't fully share yet with anyone not properly prepared to receive it, we'll face true monsters again, the kind that kill permanently, the kind that forced heroes like Akira to sacrifice everything just to seal them away. The training room fell silent as Sora and Ryu absorbed this information, their expressions shifting as implications became clear to them, both simultaneously, now understanding. How long? Sora asked, her voice steady despite the gravity of what she was processing through logical analysis applied to the situation described to them. Months, maybe a year, Kaido replied, repeating Luna's estimate. Impossible to know exactly when, but soon enough that we need to prepare now, immediately. Does the guild know? Ryu questioned, glancing toward the sealed door as if expecting officials to burst through with confirmation of Kaido's claims made publicly. Kaito shook his head, unsure how much the official authorities knew about the weakening seals and the danger approaching from beneath, inevitably coming regardless. My teacher said that information is being kept secret to prevent mass panic, he explained, but preparations are being made by those who know secretly. And you're part of those preparations, Sora concluded, understanding dawning in her amber eyes as pieces fell into place within her analytical mind working quickly. That's why you needed this training, she continued. Why someone would teach you techniques powerful enough to face sealed monsters that shouldn't exist anymore theoretically. Kaido nodded, relieved that Sora had connected the dots without him needing to spell everything out completely in ways that might reveal too much information. I'm going to fight when the seals break, he stated clearly, and I need to be strong enough to make a difference when that happens inevitably. Ryu corrected firmly, stepping forward to stand beside Kaito, his expression brooking no argument about his involvement in whatever came next ahead. We're a party, he reminded them both, and parties face danger together, not separately, regardless of how dangerous the threat becomes to us all. Sora joined them, her hand resting on her bow, her amber eyes burning with determination that matched Ryu's declaration just made to them both. If ancient monsters are returning, she said, then we need to become stronger too, strong enough to stand beside you when the real battle begins finally. Kaido felt warmth spread through his chest, gratitude mixing with concern for his friends who were volunteering to face dangers they couldn't fully comprehend yet. It won't be like dungeon raids, he warned them seriously, needing them to understand what they were committing themselves to by standing with him willingly. There won't be respawns or safe retirements, he continued. Death will be permanent, and the monsters won't hold back for the cameras recording everything. We know, Sora replied simply, and we're still with you, because that's what friends do when one of them decides to save the world somehow. She said it with a slight smile, taking some of the weight from the moment, and Kaido found himself smiling back despite everything weighing on him. Then we train, he declared, raising his sword, all of us, as hard as we can, because when the darkness comes, we'll face it together. Ryu cheered, his enthusiasm returning as he lifted his shield, and even Sora allowed herself a small grin at her teammates' renewed determination displayed openly. For the next hour, they practiced together, Kaido demonstrating techniques while being careful not to reveal the full scope of his severing abilities to them yet. He showed them how to exploit openings his curse magic created, how to coordinate attacks when an enemy's defenses were compromised by severed connections temporarily. Ryu proved particularly adept at capitalizing on the moments when Kaito severed an opponent's connection to their weapon, striking during that brief window of vulnerability. Sora worked on synchronizing her shots with Kaito's severing strikes, her arrows flying through the gaps he created in magical defenses protecting training dummies. By the time their reserved hours expired, all three were breathing hard but smiling, energized by the potential their new coordination offered them together. We're going to need to register this new technique with the guild, Sora pointed out practically as they cleaned up the training room before leaving. They'll want documentation of any significant ability changes for ranking purposes and safety protocols followed during public raids broadcast to audiences watching everywhere. Kaido nodded, expecting this, having prepared an explanation that would satisfy official requirements without revealing secrets that needed to remain hidden from public knowledge. I'll call it Advanced Curse Severance, he suggested. Position it as a natural evolution of cursed blade abilities through intensive focused training received recently. That should work, Sora agreed. There's precedent for classes evolving through specialized training, though it's rare enough to attract attention from researchers studying this. They exited the training room together, returning to the guild's main hall where activity continued unabated as adventurers came and went on various quests. A familiar face caught Kaido's attention across the room, and his breath caught when he recognized the speaker addressing a gathered crowd of adventurers listening. It was the leader of the Stellar Blades, the ranked 37 party that had offered him a position just days ago before everything changed. "Kaido," the man called out, having spotted him. "Perfect timing. I wanted to follow up on our conversation about you joining my party officially." The crowd turned to look at Kaito, and he felt Sora and Ryu tense beside him, aware of the offer he had received but never told them about. Kaito walked forward, conscious of every eye on him, of the weight of the decision he had been avoiding that now demanded resolution finally. The Stellar Blades leader, a man named Takeshi with sharp features and sharper eyes, smiled confidently as Kaito approached him without hesitation, shone openly. "Have you made your decision?" Takeshi asked, his voice carrying across the hall, making this a public moment rather than a private conversation between them alone. Kaito glanced back at Sora and Ryu, at his friends who had just promised to stand with him against impossible odds faced together as team. He thought about the Sword of Severing hidden in plain sight, about Luna's warning that people would notice he was different now than before everything. He remembered Mordrin's words about choosing what kind of hero he wanted to become, ultimately through actions taken and paths deliberately chosen, willingly accepted fully. "I have," Kaito replied clearly, his voice steady despite the significance of what he was about to declare publicly before witnesses gathered here now watching. "I'm declining your offer," he continued. "The Crimson Fangs are my party, and I'm staying with them regardless of rank or prestige or pay offered." Takeshi's confident smile faltered, surprise flickering across his features before he recovered his composure with practiced ease displayed to everyone watching this unfold before them. "That's disappointing," he said, though his tone suggested it was more than simple disappointment, perhaps closer to offense taken personally by the rejection given. "The Stellar Blades don't make offers lightly," he added, his voice taking on an edge that made the implied threat obvious to everyone present listening carefully. "And I don't refuse them lightly," Kaito replied calmly, refusing to be intimidated by status or veiled threats delivered publicly before many witnesses gathered around them. "But my answer stands," he finished. "I'm staying with my team, the people who believed in me when nobody else would give me a chance." The hall erupted into whispers, adventurers discussing this unprecedented rejection of a top 40 party's invitation by someone currently ranked 73 in the official standings. Takeshi's expression hardened, and Kaito saw something dangerous flash in the man's eyes before he masked it with a neutral smile forced into place, carefully maintained. "Very well," Takeshi said coolly. "I hope you don't come to regret that decision when you're still stuck in the lower ranks years from now." He turned and walked away, his party members following, but not before several of them shot hostile glances toward Kaito, standing there defiantly watching them leave. Sora appeared at Kaito's side immediately, her hand on his shoulder, grounding him in the reality of the choice he had just made publicly and permanently. "That was stupid," she said bluntly, but her amber eyes were shining with something that might have been pride mixed with exasperation at his recklessness. "Probably," Kaito agreed, grinning despite the burning bridges he could feel collapsing behind him with that single decision made and announced to everyone present here. Ryu laughed, slapping Kaito's back hard enough to stagger him forward a step, his enthusiasm infectious despite the potential consequences of rejecting such prestige. "That's our curse boy," he declared loudly enough for nearby adventurers to hear, too stubborn to know when he should take the easy path offered. The tension broke, and Kaito felt the weight lift from his shoulders. The decision made, the path forward clear even if it was harder than alternatives. They returned to their table, sitting together as a party united by choice rather than convenience or opportunistic advancement sought desperately by many others around. "So what now?" Ryu asked, leaning back in his chair, his expression expectant as he waited for Kaito to lay out their next steps forward together. Kaito thought about Luna's words, about living his life and growing stronger through experience until the seals broke and everything changed forever dramatically soon. "Now we take quests," he said, "challenging ones, dangerous ones, anything that will push us to improve faster than normal progression rates would allow normally. We prepare," he continued, his voice taking on the determination that had carried him through months of brutal training in the Undervault, endured willingly accepted. "And when the darkness comes," he finished, meeting the eyes of his friends, his party, his family chosen through shared hardship endured together always. "We'll be ready to face it, not as performers in safe dungeons, but as true heroes fighting for something that actually matters to us all." Sora and Ryu nodded, their expressions reflecting the same determination, the same willingness to face whatever came next together without hesitation or doubt remaining between them. In that moment, Sitting in the guild hall surrounded by adventurers who saw dungeons as entertainment, Kaito felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not just for himself, but for the world. Because if 3 outcasts could come together like this, what else might be possible when facing impossible odds? The sword of severing pulsed once against his side, as if acknowledging his choice, and Kaito smiled, knowing Luna would approve of the path selected. The journey ahead would be hard, perhaps the hardest thing he would ever face, but he wouldn't walk it alone anymore despite the solitary burden carried. And that, Kaito realized, made all the difference in ways he was only beginning to understand fully as truth revealed slowly over time passing forward. 3 weeks passed in a blur of increasingly difficult quests, each one pushing the Crimson Fangs closer to their limits than the last attempt made. Kaito stood before the guild's quest board, studying the available missions with an intensity that had become his trademark recently among other adventurers observing. "That one!" Sora said from beside him, pointing to a notice that made several nearby adventurers shake their heads in disbelief at her selection. The quest was marked red, indicating extreme danger, a request to clear a newly discovered dungeon that had appeared overnight outside the city limits. "Unranked dungeons are unpredictable," Ryu observed, reading over their shoulders, though his tone suggested interest rather than protest about the dangerous choice made. Kaito tore the notice from the board, ignoring the whispers that followed the action, adventurers questioning why a rank 73 party would attempt something so reckless. "We need unpredictable," he replied, heading toward the registration desk where a tired-looking official processed their paperwork with mechanical efficiency born of repetition. The official's eyes widened when she saw which quest they were registering for, her finger hovering over the approval button hesitantly before pressing it. "You're aware this dungeon hasn't been mapped or rated yet?" she asked, her tone making it clear she thought they were making a terrible mistake. "We're aware," Sora confirmed, signing the liability waiver that acknowledged they understood the risks involved in exploring completely unknown territory without preparation time. "There won't be cameras inside until the initial clearing is completed," the official continued, as if hoping this would dissuade them from proceeding forward recklessly. "Even better," Kaito said, and the official sighed, stamping their registration with a finality that suggested she expected them to die horribly and soon. They left the guild hall together, making their way through Argentum's streets toward the eastern gate where the new dungeon had reportedly manifested overnight. "You're sure about this?" Ryu asked, not doubting but confirming that Kaito had reasons beyond simple recklessness for choosing such a dangerous quest specifically. Kaito nodded, his hand resting on the sword of severing disguised as his old weapon, feeling its pulse responding to his heightened anticipation building. "If ancient monsters are returning," he explained, "then these new dungeons appearing might be connected to the weakening seals Luna mentioned to me during training. Testing ourselves against unknown dangers now," he continued, "will prepare us better than running scripted dungeons designed to be cleared safely every single time." Sora hummed thoughtfully, understanding the logic even if the risk made her naturally cautious, nature rebel against such impulsive decision-making displayed by Kaito recently. The eastern gate loomed before them, guards checking identification and quest registrations before allowing adventurers to pass through into the wilderness beyond city walls. One guard, a grizzled veteran with scars marking his face, stopped them with a raised hand before they could proceed to the checkpoint ahead. "You kids registered for the Red Dungeon?" he asked, his tone mixing respect and pity in equal measure as he examined their papers carefully. "We did," Kaito confirmed, meeting the guard's weathered gaze without flinching or showing any hesitation about their chosen path forward into danger unknown. The guard was silent for a long moment, studying each of them in turn, his experienced eyes evaluating their readiness for what they were about to face. "I cleared dungeons for 20 years before this posting," he said finally, handing back their papers, "and I've seen that look before in young adventurers." "What look?" Ryu asked, curious despite the situation, always eager to learn from those with more experience gained through years of survival against odds. "The look of people who've decided they need to prove something," the guard replied, "to themselves more than anyone else watching them attempt impossible things. Just remember," he added, his voice dropping lower, "proving yourself doesn't matter if you don't survive to tell anyone about it afterwards successfully completed." Kaito nodded, appreciating the concern even as he knew they wouldn't turn back now, regardless of warnings given by well-meaning veterans who understood danger. They passed through the gate, leaving the city's protective walls behind, venturing into wilderness that had once been far more dangerous before dungeons became controlled. The forest outside Argentum was peaceful, deceptively so, sunlight filtering through leaves while birds sang in trees, seemingly unaware of any threat present nearby. "There!" Sora pointed ahead, where the forest opened into a clearing that definitely hadn't existed on any maps they had studied before departing the city. In the center of that clearing stood an entrance, not carved from stone like normal dungeons, but seeming to tear reality itself apart. The opening pulsed with dark energy, edges flickering between existence and non-existence in ways that made Kaito's enhanced perception scream warnings about fundamental wrongness. "That's not a normal dungeon," Ryu stated unnecessarily, his shield already in hand, every instinct telling him they were looking at something far more dangerous. Kaito extended his severing sight, perceiving the threads around the entrance, and what he saw made his blood run cold despite months of preparation. The dungeon wasn't connected to reality properly, its threads frayed and wrong, as if something had forced its way through from elsewhere without permission granted. "This is what Luna warned about," he murmured, understanding dawning. "The seal's weakening, allowing things through that shouldn't be able to manifest here yet." "Should we report this to the guild?" Sora asked, though her hand remained on her bow, ready to fight rather than retreat, despite the sensible question. Kaito considered it, weighing responsibility against the opportunity to test himself against genuine threats rather than entertainment designed for safe consumption by masses. "We clear it first," he decided, then report with complete information rather than speculation, give them concrete data about what we found inside there. "Plus," he added with a grim smile, "if we turn back now, someone else will attempt it, someone less prepared than we are currently." Ryu laughed, the sound inappropriately cheerful given the circumstances, but it broke the tension that had been building among them as they stood hesitating. "Let's go save some idiot adventurers' lives by clearing this thing ourselves before they can get themselves killed trying," he declared, marching toward the entrance. Sora and Kaito exchanged glances, then followed, their party united by shared recklessness disguised as heroism. Even they recognized as slightly insane, ultimately. The moment they passed through the dungeon's entrance, reality twisted violently around them in ways that made even Kaito's enhanced perception struggle to process. They emerged not into a constructed dungeon corridor, but into what looked like a nightmare given physical form through dark magic concentrated impossibly thick. The sky above was wrong, purple and black swirling together, and the ground beneath their feet pulsed as if alive, breathing in rhythm disturbing. "What is this place?" Ryu whispered, his usual confidence shaken by the alien environment surrounding them on all sides, oppressively present everywhere at once. Kaito extended his severing sight fully, needing to understand what they had walked into, and the threads he saw made him wish he hadn't looked. Everything was wrong, connections twisted and corrupted, reality itself seeming sick here in ways that suggested this space was fundamentally incompatible with normal existence maintained. "This isn't a dungeon," he said slowly, realization hitting him. "This is a tear, a wound in reality itself allowing something through from elsewhere." "From where?" Sora asked, an arrow already knocked, her eyes scanning the twisted landscape for threats that surely lurked here waiting for them patiently. Before Kaito could answer, movement caught their attention, and from the pulsing ground emerged creatures that defied proper description through normal vocabulary available. They were vaguely humanoid but wrong in every proportion, limbs too long, joints bending in directions that shouldn't be possible according to anatomy. Their faces were blank except for mouths that opened far too wide, revealing teeth that seemed to multiply even as Kaito watched them approaching slowly. "What do we call these things?" Ryu asked, raising his shield, trying to maintain his usual humor despite obvious fear in his voice showing through clearly. "Abominations," Kaito decided, drawing his sword, feeling the sword of severing, eager to cut these things that violated natural order so completely without question. The creatures rushed forward with horrible speed, their movements jerky and unnatural, but covering ground faster than anything human-sized should possibly manage ever. Kaito moved first, his blade singing through the air, severing the threads connecting the nearest abomination to the corrupted reality sustaining its existence here. The creature dissolved immediately, screaming in frequencies that hurt to hear. its form unraveling like poorly made cloth pulled apart by invisible hands roughly. "Aim for complete destruction," Kaito shouted to his teammates, realizing normal combat rules wouldn't apply here against enemies that shouldn't exist at all fundamentally. Sora's arrows flew, each one striking true, but they passed through the abominations without seeming to cause damage until she adjusted her technique desperately. She began channeling more mana into her shots, making them solid enough to interact with these creatures existing partially outside normal reality's boundaries. Ryu discovered that his shield worked normally, the abominations unable to pass through its physical barrier despite their reality-warping nature possessed inherently always. Together they fought, establishing a rhythm that had become second nature through weeks of intensive training, together constantly pushing their limits higher daily. Kaito severed connections, creating openings that Sora exploited with precision shots, while Ryu protected them both from attacks they couldn't dodge or counter effectively. But for every abomination they destroyed, two more emerged from the pulsing ground, the wound in reality seemingly endless in its capacity to spawn horrors. "We need to close the tier," Kaito realized, searching for the source, the central point where reality had been ripped apart, allowing this nightmare through. His severing sight revealed it, a massive knot of corrupted threads deeper into this impossible space, pulsing with dark energy that made him nauseous observing. "There," he pointed. "We need to reach that point and sever it from this world completely, cut its connection to our reality permanently somehow." "Lead the way!" Ryu shouted, forming up beside Kaito, his shield raised as they began pushing forward through the seemingly endless waves of enemies. Sora covered their advance, her arrows flying constantly, each shot precise despite the chaos surrounding them on all sides, threatening to overwhelm their position. They fought their way forward meter by agonizing meter, cutting through abominations that seemed determined to prevent them from reaching the tier's center located ahead. Kaito's arms burned from continuous sword work, his mana reserves depleting faster than they ever had even during Luna's most brutal training sessions endured. But he pushed on, driven by understanding that if they failed here, this tear would spread, consuming more reality, spawning more abominations to terrorize. Finally, they reached it, a swirling vortex of dark energy that hurt to look at directly, reality screaming silently at the violation of natural law. "Can you close it?" Sora asked, standing back to back with Ryu, both defending against abominations still trying to reach them desperately before the closing happened. Kaito extended his perception into the vortex, seeing the threads that connected it to their world, anchoring this wound open despite reality's attempts to heal. They were thick, corrupted, pulsing with power far greater than anything he had encountered before outside of his battle with Mordrin in the Undervault. "I can try," he said, raising the Sword of Severing, channeling everything he had learned, everything Luna had taught him about cutting fundamental connections. The blade glowed with dark purple energy, brighter than it ever had, responding to his need, to the threat this tier represented to everything he cared about. Kaito struck, severing the first thread, and the vortex shuddered, the abominations around them shrieking in unison as their connection weakened significantly immediately. He struck again and again, each cut draining more of his energy, but weakening the tier's hold on reality by measurable amounts with each successful strike. "Hurry!" Ryu urged, his shield cracking under the assault of increasingly desperate abominations trying to stop what Kaito was doing to their source of existence. Kaito ignored everything except the threads before him, cutting with precision learned through months of practice, refusing to fail now when success mattered most. The final thread was the thickest, pulsing with so much power that Kaito knew cutting it would drain him completely, leave him defenseless if it didn't work. "Trust your training," Luna's voice echoed in his memory. "Trust yourself. Trust that you're strong enough for what needs to be done when it matters." Kaito poured everything into one final strike, severing the last thread with an explosion of purple energy that lit up the entire corrupted space. The vortex collapsed, imploding with a sound like reality itself screaming in relief, and the abominations dissolved as their connection to existence was severed completely. The twisted landscape began unraveling around them, and Kaito realized with horror that they were still inside when the entire space disappeared from existence. "Run!" Sora shouted unnecessarily, all three of them sprinting toward where they hoped the entrance still existed as reality collapsed inward behind them rapidly. They dove through the exit just as the dungeon tore itself apart, tumbling onto grass that felt impossibly soft after the corruption they had endured. Kaito lay on his back, breathing hard, staring up at a normal blue sky that seemed miraculous after what they had just experienced inside there. "Is everyone alive?" Ryu asked, his voice shaking slightly, the first time Kaito had ever heard fear from him that couldn't be masked with humor. "Alive," Sora confirmed, sitting up slowly, checking herself for injuries that might have occurred during their desperate escape from collapsing reality experienced together as team. Kaito managed to sit up, looking back toward where the dungeon entrance had been, finding only normal forest with no sign of disturbance visible anywhere. "It's gone," he said, relief flooding through him. "We sealed it completely, sent it back to wherever it was trying to break through from originally." "What was that place?" Ryu asked, the question they were all thinking, the horror of what they had faced still fresh in their minds, vividly recalled. Kaito thought about the corrupted threads, the impossible geometry, the creatures that shouldn't exist according to any natural law governing their world structure fundamentally. "A preview," he said grimly, "of what's coming when the seals break fully, when reality stops being able to hold back what the Demon King represents." The weight of that statement settled over them, and for a long moment, nobody spoke, processing the implications of what they had just barely survived together. "Then we need to get stronger," Sora said finally, standing and offering her hand to help Kaito up from the ground where he still sat exhausted. "A lot stronger," Ryu agreed, "because if that was just a preview, I don't want to imagine the full show without proper preparation time allowed." Kaito took Sora's hand, letting her pull him to his feet, and looked at his friends who had just faced nightmare with him without hesitation. "Thank you," he said quietly, the words inadequate but sincere, "for trusting me, for following me into that, for not giving up when it looked impossible." "That's what parties do," Ryu replied simply, clasping Kaito's shoulder. "We face the impossible together, complain about it later over drinks purchased with quest rewards." Sora smiled slightly, and Kaito found himself returning it, the moment of connection grounding him after the horror they had just barely escaped from successfully. They made their way back to the city slowly, exhausted but alive, carrying knowledge that would change how the guild viewed these new dungeons appearing. The guard at the gate took one look at them and immediately called for healers, their condition apparently worse than they realized from adrenaline masking injuries. "You cleared it?" the guard asked incredulously, studying them as if seeing ghosts rather than living adventurers returned from quests completed successfully, somehow, impossibly. "We sealed it," Kaito corrected. "It wasn't a normal dungeon, it was something far worse, something the guild needs to know about immediately." The guard's expression turned grave, and he sent a runner ahead to alert guild officials that the Red Dungeon team had returned with urgent information. By the time they reached the guild hall, a crowd had gathered, word having spread that the Crimson Fangs had not only survived but cleared their suicide mission. Guildmaster Hiroshi himself waited for them, a rare sight, the old man usually delegating such matters to subordinates rather than handling them personally always. "My office," he said without preamble, gesturing for them to follow, his expression suggesting he already knew this was more serious than a standard report. They climbed the stairs to the master's office, a room they had never entered before, reserved for only the most important discussions held privately. Hiroshi closed the door, activated privacy wards similar to the training room, and sat behind his desk with a heavy sigh that suggested exhaustion carried long. "Tell me everything," he commanded, "and don't leave anything out, no matter how strange or impossible it sounds when described to others listening carefully." Kaito exchanged glances with Sora and Ryu, then began recounting their experience, from the corrupted entrance to the abominations to the reality tier sealed. Hiroshi listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail shared, his weathered hands gripping his desk until knuckles turned white from pressure. "I was afraid of this," he said finally when Kaito finished. "The reports we've been receiving, dungeons appearing overnight, reality distortions, monsters that don't match." "You knew this was happening?" Sora asked, her tone sharp, angry that they had been sent into danger without full information provided to them beforehand. "We suspected," Hiroshi corrected, "but suspicion isn't certainty, and causing mass panic without proof would be irresponsible to say the least, potentially catastrophic even." "Now we have proof," he continued, looking at Kaito specifically, "and I need to know, how did you seal that tier when it should have been impossible?" Kaito felt the weight of that question, knowing his answer would reveal more about his abilities than he had intended to share with official authorities yet. But looking at Hiroshi's expression, at the genuine concern and fear visible in the old guildmaster's eyes, he made a choice to trust him somewhat. "I have an ability," Kaito began carefully, "to sever connections, to cut the threads that bind things to reality itself when necessary for survival or protection." "Taught by whom?" Hiroshi pressed, leaning forward. "This isn't something that can be self-taught. Someone trained you specifically for this purpose, discovered somehow." Kaito thought about Luna, about the Undervault, about secrets that needed to remain hidden until the proper time came for full revelation of truth. "A teacher who knew the seals were weakening," he said, which was true even if incomplete. "Someone preparing warriors to face what's coming when they break." Hiroshi studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, apparently deciding not to push for details. Kaito was clearly unwilling to provide completely. "Keep training," he said finally. "You and your party, take whatever quests you need. I'll personally authorize access to restricted dungeons for experience gained. But be careful," he added, his voice heavy with warning. "If you died clearing that tier, we would have lost one of our best hopes for surviving." They left his office with new authorization papers that would open doors previously closed to parties of their rank in the official hierarchy maintained strictly. "Did that just happen?" Ryu asked once they were outside, staring at the papers that granted them access to top 50 level dungeons without restriction applied. "We just got fast-tracked," Sora observed, understanding the implications. "Hiroshi thinks we're important enough to break protocol for, to risk to accelerate growth significantly." Kaito looked at the authorization, at the opportunity being handed to them, and felt the weight of expectations settling onto his shoulders once more. "Then we don't waste it," he said firmly. "We use this chance to become strong enough to matter when the real battle begins soon, inevitably." His friends nodded, their determination matching his own. 3 outcasts given a chance to become heroes in a world that desperately needed them, whether it knew yet. The sword of severing pulsed against his side, and somewhere beyond reality's edge, Kaito felt Luna's approval of the path he was walking toward destiny awaiting. 2 months of relentless training transformed the Crimson Fangs from a respectable mid-tier party into something that made even veteran adventurers pause and reconsider. Kaito stood in the guild's ranking hall, staring at the updated board that displayed party standings throughout the kingdom without any favoritism shown. The Crimson Fangs had climbed from rank 73 to rank 48 in record time, their rapid ascent becoming the subject of countless discussions. "People are starting to ask questions," Sora observed quietly, standing beside him, her amber eyes scanning the crowd that watched them with mixed expressions displayed. Some looked impressed, others suspicious, and a few showed outright hostility at newcomers disrupting the established hierarchy through unexpected success achieved rapidly somehow. "Let them ask," Kaito replied, though he knew she was right to be concerned about the attention their rapid advancement was attracting from many observers. Ryu approached from the quest board, carrying papers for their next assignment, his expression troubled in a way that was unusual for him normally. "We've got a problem," he said quietly, gesturing for them to follow him away from the crowd toward a more private corner for discussion. They gathered near a window overlooking the training yards, where newer adventurers practiced basic techniques that seemed almost quaint compared to what they faced regularly. "The Stellar Blades have challenged us," Ryu explained, holding up an official challenge document bearing the seal of Takeshi's party clearly visible prominently. Kaito felt his stomach tighten, remembering the hostile looks when he had rejected their offer months ago, the veiled threat in Takeshi's departure witnessed. "What kind of challenge?" Sora asked, taking the document and reading through it carefully, her expression growing darker with each line processed analytically completely. "A ranking battle," she answered her own question. "They're invoking their right to challenge a lower-ranked party to defend their position against us." Ranking battles were rare, usually only occurring when a party felt threatened by newcomers approaching their standing, wanting to reassert dominance publicly shown. "Can we refuse?" Kaito asked, though he already suspected the answer based on guild regulations he had studied extensively during his early days here years ago. "Technically, yes," Sora replied. "But refusing would be seen as cowardice, would damage our reputation enough to stall our advancement indefinitely through public opinion. Plus," she added grimly, "Takeshi made this challenge public before filing it officially, so half the guild already knows about it and expects our response." Kaito cursed under his breath, recognizing the tactical maneuvering, the way Takeshi had trapped them into accepting regardless of their actual preferences for avoiding this. When? He asked, accepting the inevitable, already beginning to strategize how they would handle a party 17 ranks above them in official standings maintained. 3 days, Ryu answered. Enough time to prepare, but not enough to train significantly, designed to catch us before we can climb any higher potentially. Kaito nodded, understanding the calculation. Takeshi was worried they would continue rising until challenging the stellar blades would be considered reasonable rather than suicidal currently. Then we have 3 days to figure out how to beat a party that's been together for 5 years and has resources we can't match yet, he stated matter-of-factly. No pressure, Ryu joked weakly, though his usual humor couldn't quite hide the anxiety underlying his words spoken aloud for them to hear clearly present. They spent the rest of that day in the archives, researching the stellar blades, studying recordings of their dungeon raids, analyzing their tactics and techniques employed successfully. Takeshi himself was a lightning striker, a rare class that combines speed with devastating burst damage, making him extremely dangerous in close combat situations faced. His party consisted of 2 mages specializing in area control, a healer who doubled as a defensive support, and a scout who gathered intelligence while harassing enemies. They're perfectly balanced, Sora observed, reviewing footage of their latest raid. No obvious weaknesses, everyone covering everyone else's vulnerabilities identified through years of cooperation. Everyone has weaknesses, Kaito countered, though he understood her point. Finding exploitable flaws in such a well-coordinated team would be extremely difficult to accomplish. He watched Takeshi's movements carefully, studying the patterns, the way the lightning striker moved with confidence that bordered on arrogance during combat encounters shown. There, Kaito pointed, freezing the footage at a specific moment. He overextends when he's certain of victory, leaves himself exposed for a fraction of a second. That's not a weakness, Sora argued. That's just confidence, and he can afford it because his team always covers him when he commits like that successfully. Confidence becomes a weakness when someone exploits it, Kaito insisted. An idea forming, dangerous, but possibly their only chance against such superior opponents faced. Ryu leaned in, interested despite his skepticism. What are you thinking, Curse Boy? You've got that look that usually means something crazy is coming next inevitably. Kaito explained his plan, watching his teammates' expression shift from confusion to horror to reluctant acceptance as they understood what he was proposing to do. That's insane, Sora stated flatly. You'd be betting everything on a single moment. If your timing is off by even a fraction, we lose immediately. We're going to lose anyway if we fight conventionally, Kaito pointed out. They're better trained, better coordinated, have more experience fighting together as a unit. Our only advantage is that they don't know what I can really do, he continued. They think I'm just an unusually skilled cursed blade with some tricks. They don't know about the severing, Ryu realized. Understanding dawning, they'll expect curses and debuffs, but not complete disconnection from reality's bonds temporarily applied. Kaito nodded, grateful his friends understood without him needing to spell out every detail of the risky strategy being proposed to them both here now. It's still dangerous, Sora warned, though her tone suggested she was coming around to seeing this as their best option available given circumstances faced together. Everything worth doing is dangerous, Kaito replied, echoing something Luna had told him during one of their training sessions endured in the undervault below. They spent the next 3 days drilling the plan, practicing timing, building the coordination needed to execute something so precise under actual combat pressure applied. Ryu worked on his positioning, learning to be exactly where Kaito needed him at the critical moment without telegraphing their intent to observant enemies watching. Sora practiced her fastest possible shot, the one she would need to make the instant Kaito created the opening they were banking everything upon completely. On the morning of the ranking battle, the guild's main arena was packed with spectators, word having spread about the challenge issued publicly before everyone. Kaito felt the weight of thousands of eyes as they entered the arena, the Crimson Fangs walking toward their starting position with measured steps taken carefully. Across the arena floor, the stellar blades waited, Takeshi standing at their center with a confident smile that suggested he viewed this as a formality rather than real competition. The referee, a high-ranking guild official, explained the rules that everyone already knew, The battle would continue until one party yielded or was completely retired from combat. "Any final words?" Takeshi called across the arena, his voice carrying easily, making sure the crowd heard his confidence displayed openly without concern shown at all. "Don't underestimate us," Kaito replied simply, his hand resting on his sword, feeling the sword of severing eager to prove itself against these opponents present. Takeshi laughed, the sound echoing through the arena, and many in the crowd joined him, viewing Kaito's warning as naive bravado from someone outmatched completely. "Begin!" the referee shouted, and immediately the battle commenced as both parties moved into their practice formations established through years of experience gained. The Stellar Blades mages immediately cast area control spells, creating zones that would restrict movement and channel the Crimson Fangs into predetermined kill zones. But Kaito had studied these spells, understood how they worked, and began severing the threads anchoring them to the arena floor systematically without being seen. The spells flickered, weakening significantly, and Takeshi's eyes narrowed as he recognized something was wrong with their usual opening strategy, failing to perform as expected. "The cursed blade," one of the mages shouted. "He's interfering with our magic somehow, stronger than his rank suggests he should possibly be capable of." Takeshi adapted immediately, his experience showing as he signaled his team to switch to direct assault tactics instead of relying on magical preparation used normally. He moved with incredible speed, lightning crackling around his body, closing the distance between them in a blur that most eyes couldn't follow at all properly. But Kaito had watched this footage dozens of times, knew exactly how Takeshi moved, and was already shifting position before the attack fully developed forward. The lightning striker's blade passed through empty air where Kaito had been, and for just a moment, surprise flickered across Takeshi's confident expression, visible briefly. Ryu was there instantly, his shield intercepting Takeshi's follow-up strike, the impact sending shockwaves through the arena floor that cracked stone beneath them both. Sora's arrow flew, forcing one of the mages to dodge rather than cast, disrupting the Stellar Blade's coordination just enough to create momentary chaos exploited. But they were professionals, veterans of countless battles, and they recovered quickly, reforming their strategy to account for the unexpected resistance being offered stubbornly. The battle became a desperate dance, the Crimson Fangs giving ground slowly, avoiding direct confrontation, waiting for the moment Kaito had planned for specifically targeted. "They're running," someone in the crowd shouted, disappointed, having expected more from a party that had climbed so rapidly through the rankings recently achieved. But Kaito ignored the jeers, focused entirely on Takeshi, watching for the pattern he had identified in the footage studied extensively over days preparing. There, Takeshi's confidence was growing as the Crimson Fangs appeared to falter, his movements becoming more aggressive, committing harder to his strikes delivered powerfully. "Now!" Kaito shouted, and everything happened in a cascade of precisely timed actions they had drilled until it became instinctive to execute without thinking required. Ryu suddenly stopped retreating and braced himself, his shield angled perfectly to catch Takeshi's next lightning-fast strike at exactly the calculated angle needed. The impact was tremendous, but Ryu held firm, and in that fraction of a second when Takeshi was committed to his attack, fully extended completely. Kaito severed the threads connecting Takeshi to his own momentum, to the lightning magic enhancing his speed, to everything that made him the deadly striker he was. Takeshi's eyes widened in genuine shock as he suddenly found himself frozen mid-strike, unable to move, unable to understand what had just happened to him inexplicably. Sora's arrow flew, not aimed at Takeshi, but at the precise point on the arena floor where her calculations said he would fall when gravity reasserted itself. The lightning striker collapsed exactly where predicted, and before his team could react, Sora's follow-up shots had pinned his cloak to the ground, trapping him temporarily, but effectively. "Impossible!" Takeshi gasped, struggling against the severed connections that Kaito was maintaining with every bit of concentration he could muster without letting it slip away. The Stellar Blade's remaining members rushed to their leader's aid, but Ryu and Sora had practiced this scenario, knew exactly how to delay without engaging directly. Kaito walked forward slowly, his sword raised, and pressed it against Takeshi's throat, not cutting but making the threat absolutely clear to everyone watching this. "Yield," Kaito said quietly, "for Takeshi's ears only. You've lost. There's no shame in acknowledging it when you're beaten fairly in honorable combat between parties." Takeshi's face flushed with anger and humiliation, his pride warring with logic, but finally, he spoke the words that ended the battle officially without room for argument. "I yield," he said, the words barely audible but caught by the enchantments recording everything for official records maintained. The Crimson Fangs have won this ranking battle. The arena erupted in chaos, half the crowd cheering while the other half protested, unable to believe what they had just witnessed occurring before their eyes. Kaito released his severing grip, helping Takeshi to his feet despite the hostility that still burned in the man's eyes, directed toward him specifically right now. "How?" Takeshi demanded, his voice low. "What did you do to me? I've never felt anything like that before in my entire career as an adventurer." "I severed your connections," Kaito explained simply, "to your momentum, your magic, your confidence, everything that makes you who you are as a fighter temporarily applied." "That's not possible," Takeshi insisted, though his tone suggested he was trying to convince himself rather than arguing with Kaito standing before him victorious somehow. "It shouldn't be," Kaito agreed, "but the world is changing, Takeshi. Things that shouldn't be possible are becoming reality more frequently than anyone wants to admit. Train harder," he added, releasing Takeshi's hand, "because what's coming will make ranking battles seem like children playing games compared to the real threats approaching soon." Takeshi stared at him, something shifting in his expression, the anger fading slightly as understanding, or perhaps fear, began to replace it within his eyes visible. "You know something," Takeshi accused, his voice dropping further. "Something about these new dungeons appearing, about why the guild is acting so strange recently observed?" Kaito didn't answer, merely turned and walked back to where Sora and Ryu waited, his friends looking exhausted but triumphant from their unlikely victory achieved. The referee announced the official result. The Crimson Fangs were now ranked 37, having taken the Stellar Blade's position through right of combat earned fairly. More than that, they had proven themselves capable of defeating opponents considered far superior, had demonstrated abilities that made them genuinely dangerous to higher ranks now. "We did it!" Ryu breathed, disbelief and joy mixing in his voice. "We actually beat them, took their rank, proved everyone wrong about us together." "This is just the beginning," Sora said quietly, her eyes on the crowd, on the way people were looking at them differently now after witnessing their victory. Kaito nodded, knowing she was right. This victory would open doors, but also paint targets on their backs from parties that feared being challenged next inevitably. They left the arena to thunderous applause, mixed with angry shouts, the crowd divided between those impressed and those who felt the natural order had been disrupted. Back in the guild hall, Hiroshi waited for them in his office again, his expression unreadable as they entered at his summons received immediately after. "Sit," he commanded, and they obeyed, sensing this was more than a simple congratulations meeting for their victory achieved against significant odds faced together. "What you did out there," Hiroshi began slowly, choosing his words carefully, "was remarkable, but it also revealed capabilities that will attract attention unwanted by all of us. The Council of Masters will want to know about your severing ability," he continued, looking directly at Kaito with intensity that demanded complete honesty in response given. "They'll want to study it, understand it, possibly try to replicate it in others for the guild's benefit and the kingdom's defense ultimately required." Kaito felt his blood run cold, remembering Luna's warnings about revealing too much too soon, about the danger of exposure before he was strong enough. "I can't let them study me," he said firmly, meeting Hiroshi's gaze without flinching. "The ability is tied to my bloodline, to things I don't fully understand myself yet." "I know," Hiroshi replied, surprising Kaito by not pushing for access, "which is why I'm going to classify you as a special case requiring protection from council interference." "You can do that?" Sora asked, her political knowledge of guild structure clearly limited despite her intelligence demonstrated repeatedly through clever tactical thinking employed successfully. "I can for a limited time," Hiroshi clarified, citing ongoing investigation into your ability's nature before allowing others access to sensitive information gathered currently incomplete. "But eventually," he warned, "the council will override me if they believe you're a threat or a resource too valuable to leave uncontrolled and unsupervised always." "How long?" Kaito asked, understanding they were being given a grace period, time to prepare for inevitable scrutiny coming from higher authorities, soon, inevitably, eventually. 6 months? Maybe less if more reality tears appear, Hiroshi estimated. After that, I won't be able to protect you from official investigation conducted thoroughly completely. Then we have 6 months to become strong enough that it doesn't matter what the council wants, Kaito declared, determination hardening his voice into steel resolve. Strong enough that they need us more than we need them, Sora added, understanding the political reality, the way power shifted dynamics between individuals and institutions always. Hiroshi nodded approvingly, and for the first time since they entered, he smiled genuinely at them assembled before him here in his private office together. That's the right attitude, he said. Now get out of here, celebrate your victory, rest before tomorrow when the real work begins for you all. They left his office, stepping back into the guild hall where adventurers parted to let them pass, respect and fear mixing in the way people regarded them now. Drinks? Ryu suggested hopefully, eyeing a tavern across the street that was already filling with adventurers discussing the ranking battle that had just concluded dramatically. Drinks, Kaito agreed, allowing himself this moment of normalcy before everything inevitably became more complicated as their rise continued upward toward the top rankings. They found a table in the corner, away from the main crowd, but close enough to hear the discussions about their battle circulating among patrons gathered. To the Crimson Fangs, Ryu toasted, raising his mug high. Rank 37 and climbing, defying expectations and taking names along the way upward continuously. To friendship, Sora added, her rare smile appearing, and to facing impossible odds together rather than separately as individuals alone without support, needed desperately always. To the future, Kaito finished, clinking his mug against theirs. Whatever it brings, we'll face it as a party united by more than just combat effectiveness. They drank, and for that evening, Kaito let himself forget about ancient seals and demon kings and the weight of destiny pressing down on him constantly. He was just an adventurer celebrating with his friends, enjoying a victory earned through teamwork and determination, and that was enough, for now temporarily at least. But even as he laughed at Ryu's terrible jokes and listened to Sora's dry observations about their opponent's mistakes, part of Kaito remained vigilant, watching, waiting. Because somewhere beneath reality, seals continued weakening, and Luna's warning echoed in his memory about the darkness coming when they finally broke apart completely, irreparably, forever. The sword of severing pulsed against his side, a reminder that this peace was temporary, that his true purpose waited beyond these simple moments of happiness shared. Soon enough, the real battle would begin, and when it did, Kaito would need to be ready to face horrors that made today's ranking battle seem trivial. But for now, in this moment, surrounded by friends and warmth and the simple joy of victory achieved together, he was content to just be Kaito finally. The journey continued, one step at a time, toward a future uncertain but faced with courage born of friendship and purpose, discovered through trials endured together always. 6 months passed like water through fingers, each day bringing the Crimson Fangs closer to heights they had once only dreamed about. Kaito stood before the ranking board again, but this time, the number beside their party name made his breath catch in his throat. Rank 12. The Crimson Fangs had climbed into the top 15, entering territory reserved for legends and heroes of genuine renown achieved. "We're getting close," Sora murmured beside him, her amber eyes reflecting the golden letters that marked their ascension through the hierarchy steadily. Close to what? She didn't need to specify, because they all felt it, the invisible barrier separating merely skilled adventurers from true elite. The top 10 parties weren't just strong. They were institutions, backed by noble houses and corporate sponsors with resources that dwarfed anything available otherwise. "Guildmaster wants to see us," Ryu announced, approaching from the direction of Hiroshi's office with an expression that suggested this wasn't a social call. They climbed the familiar stairs together, their footsteps echoing in the corridor that had become almost a second home over these past months' training. Hiroshi's office door stood open, but the man behind the desk wasn't alone this time. 3 strangers in formal robes occupied chairs facing him. The Council of Masters, Kaito realized with sinking dread, recognizing the insignia marking them as the highest authority within the Adventurers Guild organization. "Crimson Fangs," Hiroshi said formally, his tone carefully neutral. "Allow me to introduce council members Takara, Junichi, and Keiko representing the guild's interests." Takara, A woman with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice studied them with an intensity that made Kaito's skin crawl uncomfortably always. "Rank 12 in 6 months, she stated flatly. "Unprecedented in the guild's 300-year history, maintained without exception until now, observed recently." "We worked hard," Kaito replied carefully, sensing danger in this conversation before it had even properly begun between them all assembled here presently. "Hard work doesn't explain severing abilities," Junichi interjected, a man whose gentle appearance contradicted the steel in his voice displayed openly without hesitation shown. "Cursed blade users have never demonstrated such precise control over fundamental reality bonds," he continued, leaning forward with obvious interest burning behind his words. "We'd like to understand how you developed this technique," Keiko added, younger than the other two, but no less intimidating in her focused attention directed. Kaito exchanged glances with Sora and Ryu, remembering Hiroshi's warning that this moment would come inevitably, despite attempts to delay it temporarily through protection. "I was trained," he said simply, offering no more than absolutely necessary to satisfy immediate curiosity without revealing dangerous secrets kept deliberately hidden, always. "By whom?" Takara demanded, her icy eyes narrowing. "No registered masters teach such abilities. They shouldn't exist according to conventional magical theory understood completely." "Someone outside the guild's jurisdiction," Kaito replied, which was technically true given Luna's nature and the Undervault's existence beyond normal reality, entirely separate. The 3 council members exchanged looks, and Kaito saw calculations being made, political considerations being weighed against curiosity and potential benefits gained through cooperation. "The council has decided," Takara announced, her tone brooking no argument, "that you will demonstrate your abilities under controlled conditions for proper documentation purposes." "And if I refuse?" Kaito asked, though he already knew refusing wasn't really an option available to him at this critical juncture faced together presently. "Then we revoke your party's registration," Junichi stated bluntly, effective immediately, citing security concerns about undocumented abilities representing potential threats to guild operations. Sora's hand moved toward her bow instinctively before Kaito caught her wrist, shaking his head slightly, warning her against escalating this confrontation unnecessarily now. "I'll demonstrate," Kaito agreed reluctantly, "but only the basic severing techniques, nothing that could be weaponized or replicated by others without proper training received." Takara nodded curtly, apparently satisfied with this compromise, though her expression suggested she would push for more later when circumstances allowed it, inevitably, eventually. They were led to a specialized testing chamber deep within the guild's research wing, a place few adventurers ever saw during their entire careers. The room was circular, walls covered in measurement enchantments that would record every aspect of any ability used within its confines for analysis conducted. "Begin with something simple," Keiko instructed, gesturing toward a training dummy positioned in the chamber's center for demonstration purposes, specifically prepared beforehand carefully. Kaito drew his sword, the sword of severing disguised as his familiar weapon, and extended his perception to see the threads connecting dummy to reality. He severed one thread cleanly, and the dummy's left arm fell off despite no physical damage being visible to observers watching intently from behind protective barriers. The measurement enchantments lit up, recording data that made the council members lean forward with renewed interest, suddenly peaked, significantly higher than before shown. Again, Takara commanded, "Sever a different connection. Show us the range of what you can effect through this technique, demonstrated successfully here witnessed directly." For an hour, Kaito demonstrated various applications of his severing ability, carefully avoiding anything that would reveal the sword of severing's true nature hidden. He showed them how to disconnect objects from gravity temporarily, how to break enchantments by severing their connection to the caster maintaining them actively. He even demonstrated severing the thread connecting a summoned creature to its master, sending it back to wherever it originated from without killing it directly. The council members took notes furiously, their expressions mixing fascination with barely concealed greed at the possibility such power represented if controlled, properly utilized. "Remarkable," Junichi breathed when Kaito finally lowered his sword, exhausted from maintaining such precise control for so long continuously without proper rest breaks. "This changes everything," Keiko added, her eyes distant as she clearly imagined applications beyond simple combat situations faced during dungeon raids conducted safely. "This changes nothing," Hiroshi interrupted firmly, speaking for the first time since the demonstration began here in this specialized chamber designed for analysis purposes. "Kaido's abilities are unique to him," he continued. "Attempting to teach others without understanding the underlying principles would be dangerous and potentially catastrophic ultimately." "We could study him further," Takara suggested, her ice-cold gaze fixing on Kaido like a predator evaluating prey worth pursuing relentlessly until captured successfully completely. "You could try," Sora interjected, her voice carrying a warning that made even the council members pause briefly before responding to her unexpected challenge issued. "But he's under my protection as his party leader," she continued, stepping forward to stand beside Kaido protectively without hesitation shown at all ever. "And mine is his teammate," Ryu added, moving to Kaito's other side, presenting a united front against the council's implicit threat delivered through suggestions made. The chamber fell silent as the council members reassessed the situation, clearly not having expected such fierce loyalty from a party so recently ascended to prominence. "Very well," Takara conceded finally, though her expression suggested this was merely a tactical retreat rather than genuine acceptance of limitations placed upon them. "We'll allow you to continue operating independently for now," she stated, emphasizing the temporary nature of this permission granted reluctantly under pressure applied successfully. "But understand," Junichi warned, his gentle mask slipping briefly to reveal something far less kind beneath the surface, carefully maintained always before others watching. "If more reality tears appear, if the situation deteriorates further than current levels observed, we will require your full cooperation without room for negotiation available." Kaido nodded, understanding the implicit threat. They were being given conditional freedom that could be revoked at any moment if circumstances changed drastically. They left the research wing together, none of them speaking until they were safely outside the guild building, away from listening enchantments monitoring conversations. "That was close," Ryu said finally, releasing a breath he seemed to have been holding since the confrontation ended back in the testing chamber. "Too close," Sora agreed, her expression troubled. "The council knows something's wrong. They're preparing for something specific, even if they don't understand what exactly." "They're scared," Kaido realized, understanding dawning. The reality tears appearing more frequently, the reports coming in from other kingdoms. They know something's coming soon. "Which means we're running out of time," Sora concluded, her tactical mind already working through implications of the council's fear manifesting in desperation shown. Kaido pulled out a communication crystal, a rare item that Hiroshi had given them after their first encounter with a reality tear months ago experienced. He channeled mana into it, and Luna's voice emerged from the crystal after a moment's delay, sounding tired in ways he hadn't heard before ever. "Kaito," she greeted, "I was wondering when you'd contact me. Things must be accelerating if you're risking an open communication channel monitored potentially by others." "How long?" Kaito asked directly, dispensing with pleasantries, needing to know the timeline they were working against before planning next steps carefully together as team. Luna was silent for several heartbeats, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that made Kaito's blood run cold despite expecting bad news. 2 weeks, she said quietly. "Maybe 3 if we're fortunate. The primary seal is deteriorating faster than any projection suggested it would ultimately fail. The Demon King is waking," she continued, "and when he breaks free, every sealed monster in the kingdom will be released simultaneously as the binding magic collapses." Ryu cursed under his breath, while Sora's face had gone pale, the enormity of what they were facing finally becoming impossible to deny or minimize anymore. "What do we do?" Kaito asked, his voice steadier than he felt inside, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him like physical force applied. "You come to the Undervault," Luna instructed. "Tonight, all 3 of you. There's no more time for gradual preparation or careful training conducted over months planned. I'll teach you everything I can in the time remaining," she promised. "Push you harder than ever before, because when the seal breaks, we need you ready." "Not just you, Kaito," she added, surprising him. "Your party, your friends. They'll face this darkness beside you, and they need to be strong enough to survive." The crystal went dark, Luna's message delivered, and the 3 of them stood in silence processing what they had just learned about their immediate future ahead. 2 weeks, Sora repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. 2 weeks until everything we know changes forever and the world faces monsters again like ancient times. "Then we don't waste a moment," Kaito declared, his hand moving to rest on the sword of severing, feeling its pulse responding to his determination renewed. We tell Hiroshi what's happening, he continued. Give him time to prepare the guild's defenses, to warn other kingdoms about what's coming soon, inevitably. And then? Ryu asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer to his own question posed to them both standing beside him presently. Then we train like our lives depend on it, Kaito replied grimly. Because they do, along with everyone else in this city who has no idea what's coming. They returned to the guild hall, requesting immediate audience with Hiroshi despite the late hour, using emergency protocols reserved for critical threats identified. The old guild master listened to their report without interrupting, his weathered face growing graver with each detail shared about the failing seal's condition. I'll contact the other guild masters tonight, he said when they finished. Coordinate defensive preparations, evacuation plans for civilians unable to fight when crisis strikes. But know this, he added, looking at each of them in turn, the council will try to conscript you, to force you into their defensive plans regardless. They can try, Sora said coldly, her amber eyes burning with defiance. But we have our own mission, one that matters more than following their orders blindly. Hiroshi nodded, unsurprised by her response. Then go, do what you must. I'll buy you whatever time I can before the council realizes you've disappeared temporarily. They left the guild under cover of darkness, making their way to the Memorial Plaza where Luna had first appeared to Kaito months ago, changing everything forever. The statue of Akira seemed to watch them as they approached, and Kaito felt a strange connection to his ancestor, understanding now what Akira must have felt. The weight of the world's fate resting on shoulders too young, too unprepared, but driven forward by necessity when no one else could or would do it. Luna materialized from silver light, her golden eyes taking in all three of them before nodding once as if confirming something she had already expected to see. Ready? She asked, extending her hands toward them, and Kaito noticed she looked different, older somehow, as if the strain was aging her visibly now. Ready, they answered in unison, taking her hands, and reality twisted as the Undervault accepted them all into its embrace once more together finally. They emerged in the familiar dark chamber, but it had changed, expanded somehow, with training areas prepared for 3 instead of 1 adventurer learning skills. 2 weeks isn't much time, Luna stated. All business now, the brief gentleness gone, replaced by the harsh instructor Kaito remembered from his initial training. But it's what we have, she continued, so we'll use every second efficiently. Push past every limit you thought you had until breaking points reached. Sora, Ryu, she addressed them directly. You'll learn to fight true monsters, not entertainment avatars, but things that kill permanently without mercy shown ever. You'll learn to survive in environments where reality itself is hostile, she explained, gesturing toward passages leading to training grounds prepared specifically for them separately. And you, she turned to Kaito, you'll learn the final lessons, the ones I held back before because you weren't ready to handle them safely without supervision. Now you don't have a choice, she finished, her golden eyes boring into him, because the Demon King won't care whether you're ready when he breaks free finally. They separated, each following Luna's conjured guides to their respective training areas, knowing they wouldn't see each other again until the training concluded successfully completed. Kaito's path led deeper than he had ever gone before, past the chamber where Mordrin had been sealed, past the frozen lake where he had first demonstrated. Finally, he emerged into a vast cavern that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions, and in its center floated a figure bound by countless chains. The Demon King. Even sealed, even weakened, his presence was overwhelming, a pressure that made breathing difficult and thinking clearly almost impossible to maintain. This is your final test, Luna's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. You must sever one of the chains binding him without releasing him completely. Prove you can control your power precisely enough to wound him when the time comes, she instructed, or admit you're not ready for what's required soon. Kaito stared at the bound figure, at the chains that had held for 300 years, and understood what Luna was asking him to attempt now. She wanted him to touch the Demon King's power directly, to test himself against the very force he would need to defeat when the seal broke inevitably. Taking a deep breath, Kaito drew the Sword of Severing, its true form revealing itself now that there was no need for disguise anymore here. He extended his perception, seeing the threads connecting each chain to Akira's ancient spell, to the sacrifice that had created this prison holding evil contained. Choosing the weakest thread carefully, the one that would do the least damage if severed incorrectly, Kaido raised his blade and struck with everything Luna taught. The chain cracked but didn't break, and the Demon King's eyes opened for the first time in centuries, fixing upon Kaido with interest that felt predatory. "So," a voice like grinding stones spoke directly into Kaido's mind. "Another one comes! Another descendant thinking he can finish what Akira started before dying trying?" "I will finish it," Kaito declared, his voice steady despite the fear threatening to overwhelm him completely as he faced this ancient evil directly finally. "We shall see," the Demon King replied, and then his eyes closed again, returning to his slumber, but the message was clear enough, understood perfectly well. The real battle was coming, and when it arrived, only one of them would survive the confrontation that would determine the world's fate, ultimately forever. Kaito lowered his sword, his entire body trembling from the brief exchange, from touching power so vast it made Luna's training seem gentle, by comparison experienced. "Good," Luna said, appearing beside him, her hand on his shoulder steadying him. "Now you understand what you're truly facing when the seal breaks open." "Now we can begin the real training," she added, her golden eyes reflecting the purple glow of his sword held ready and his shaking hand grip maintained. 2 weeks. That was all the time remaining before everything changed forever, before the peaceful world ended and true monsters returned to hunt humanity again. 2 weeks to become strong enough to matter, to make a difference, to stand against darkness that had once consumed entire civilizations before being sealed away. Kaito tightened his grip on the Sword of Severing, feeling its power respond to his determination, and followed Luna deeper into the Undervault's depths. The training that would determine everything was about to begin, and there was no room for failure when the world's survival hung in the balance precariously. Sirens drowned the Guildhall as the sky split above Argentum, bleeding red light into noon streets. Crystal screens that once showed rankings now screamed warnings, and the crowd froze like mannequins on cue. Ryu slammed his shield into place and barked, "We move, now!" as stone windows rattled from distant roars. Sora scanned the rooftops and whispered, "That is not a dungeon spawn," while shadows crawled against the sun. Kaito felt the Sword of Severing pulse hot at his hip, tugging his ribs toward the Undervault like a hook. Guildmaster Hiroshi staggered in, pale and shaking, and said, "The seals are failing, and they found a way." Takara stepped from behind him, calm as winter, and ordered, "Hand over the weapon, and you may live." Jinichi raised a sigil-stamped cuff, and Keiko drew a needle of mana glass, their smiles thin and practiced. Sora lifted her bow and hissed, "You were never testing him for safety," and the air sharpened with intent. Kaito met Hiroshi's eyes and saw apology there, and then Takara snapped her fingers like cutting a thread. The floor sigils flared, chains of light wrapped Kaito's wrists, and his muscles locked mid-breath in silence. Ryu charged, but invisible pressure slammed him flat, and the hall's cheering banners tore like wet paper. "You want to study me," Kaito growled, "or you want to sell me?" And Takara's mask finally slipped open. "Both," she replied, "because the Demon King's return is inevitable, and someone must own the answer." Outside, a scream rose, then another, and the ceiling cracked as something huge brushed the city like fog. Hiroshi shouted, "Stop this madness!" But Keiko drove the mana needle into his neck, and he went limp. Sora's eyes widened, and she whispered, "They poisoned him," while Ryu's teeth ground behind his helmet. Kaito closed his eyes and searched for threads, not of steel or flesh, but of vows, fear, and control. He found Takara's binding thread anchored to the hall's core rune, and he sliced it with a thought alone. The chains of light fell away, and Takara staggered, surprise flashing across her ice eyes for one heartbeat. Ryu rose like a tower and punched Junichi into a table, and splinters burst like fireworks in dust. Sora fired without looking, and her arrow pinned Keiko's sleeve to the wall, trapping her arm mid-cast. Kaito grabbed Hiroshi and severed the poison's bond to his blood, and color returned to the old man's face. Hiroshi coughed and rasped. They opened the Undervault gate under the plaza, as alarms howled louder. Takara backed toward the stairwell and said, "If you go down there, you will free what you fear today." Kaito answered, Then I will end it, and the sword thrummed as if it recognized the promise as law. They sprinted into the streets where citizens fled, and a reality tear hung above the plaza like a wound. From that wound, shadewalkers poured into daylight, and their red cores pulsed like diseased stars. Ryu planted his shield and roared, "Line!" and the first wave shattered against his barrier in sparks. Sora's arrows cut cores with clean intent, and each kill left black smoke that stank of old graves behind. Kaido moved through the chaos, severing threads that tethered monsters to the tear, collapsing them mid-leap. Takara appeared atop Akira's statue and raised a council crest, and the tear widened like an eye-opening. "Behold the era of true power," she proclaimed, and the plaza stones sank as a hidden door yawned open. Luna stepped from the shadow of the statue, her golden eyes burning, and she said, "Enough, Takara." Takara froze, recognition sharpening her face, and she spat, "Warden," as if the title tasted like rust. Luna's voice stayed gentle, yet the air bowed, and she said, "You used my name to steal my locks, Takara." Kaito stared at Luna and asked, "What are you?" And she answered, "A promise Akira left behind to guard you." The undervault gate exhaled cold, and from below came a laugh that shook dust from every marble seam. Ryu gripped Kaito's shoulder and said, "We finish this together," and Sora nodded without blinking. Takara leapt into the opening, escaping downward, and Luna motioned, "Follow before the chain breaks." They descended through black corridors where time felt thick, and the sword's glow painted wounds in purple. Hiroshi limped after them, refusing to stop, and muttered, "I won't let boys carry my failures alone." At the Undervault's heart, an ocean of threads filled the chamber, and each thread hummed a different lie. In the center, Akira's chains hung around a throne of bone, and the Demon King smiled from within it. Takara stood at the altar, hands raised, feeding the chains with stolen mana, turning rust into hunger. The Demon King purred, "Bring me the blade," and the chamber answered with echoes like swallowing mouths. Kaido stepped forward and said, "You don't want my blade," and the Demon King chuckled, "I want you." Luna lifted her hand, and the threads became visible to all, and Ryu swore softly at the infinite web. Sora whispered, "So every life is a knot," and Luna replied, "And every lie is a shortcut to ruin for all." Takara screamed, "The guild needs control!" and hurled a spear of light at Kaito's chest with raw fury. Ryu blocked, the spear exploding into shards that carved his armor, and he stayed standing through pain. Sora shot Takara's knee, but the arrow stopped mid-air. Caught by a thread, the Demon King pinched between claws. "Cute," the Demon King said, and with a twitch he yanked that thread, slamming Sora into the wall hard. Kaito saw Sora's breath leave her, and the world narrowed to one brutal line of choice and consequence. He cut the thread binding Sora to impact, and the force vanished, leaving her sliding down stone alive. Takara laughed. "You can cut physics," and Kaito answered, "I can cut ownership," and swung at her hard. His blade did not touch her skin, yet her pack thread snapped, and her borrowed mana spilled like water. Keiko's voice echoed from above, chanting through conduits, and the chains around the throne began to fade. Hiroshi shouted, "Cut the conduit!" and Kaito followed the song's thread through the ceiling like a map. One slash severed the conduit to the surface, and the chant died, replaced by the Demon King's snarl. The throne cracked, and shadow poured out, forming wings of night, and the chamber's threads trembled in fear. Ryu planted his shield again and yelled, "Behind me!" as darkness surged like a tidal wave at them. Kaito stepped past him and said, "No!" and the sword flared, drawing every thread into sharp focus at once. Luna grabbed Kaito's wrist and whispered, "To end him, you must cut his bond to existence itself tonight." "And you?" Kaito asked, and Luna smiled. "I am part of that bond, and I am tired of waiting alone here." Sora forced herself upright and said, "Don't you dare die alone," and Luna glanced at her with warmth. The Demon King lunged, claws aimed for Kaito's throat, and Ryu took the hit, armor buckling with a scream. Kaito caught Ryu's falling thread and stitched it with a quick sever and rejoined, buying him one breath. "Quit playing God," Takara spat, crawling, and Kaito replied, "I'm playing surgeon," without flinching. Luna stepped into the shadow's path and spread her arms, and the chains reformed around her like silver rain. The Demon King hissed. "Warden!" And Luna answered, "Akira loved this world enough to bleed for it." She looked at Kaito and said, "Cut now," and the web revealed a single thick thread tethering the king. Kaito raised the sword, but the thread was anchored through Luna's heart, glowing with her own life force. For a heartbeat, Kaito saw every memory of his friends, every rejection, and every step that led here. Ryu coughed blood and laughed. "Curse boy, do it," and Sora whispered, "We will carry the rest together." Kaito's hands stopped shaking and he said, "Thank you," to Luna, to Akira, and to the dark itself here. The sword fell in a silent arc, and it cut the tether cleanly, slicing through Luna's glow without mercy. Luna's body turned to light, not smoke, and her last words were, "Choose people over applause, always." The Demon King froze, his grin cracking, and he screamed as his connection unraveled like cloth in fire. Shadows tore away from his bones, the throne collapsed, and the chamber's threads snapped back into harmony. Takara watched, horrified, and croaked, "You erased him," while her stolen power evaporated into nothing. Kaito lowered the blade and said, "I severed the lie that he belonged here," and the air finally breathed. Above, the plaza tear shrank to a pinprick, and shade walkers collapsed into harmless ash under sunlight. Hiroshi fell to his knees, tears cutting clean lines through dust, and murmured, "Akira, we failed you." Kaito shook his head and answered, "We corrected course," while the sword's glow dimmed to a quiet ember. Ryu stood, bruised and furious, and snapped Takara's crest in half, ending her authority with a crack. Sora tied Takara's hands and said, "The council wanted control," and her voice was colder than ice now. They climbed back to the surface as dawn bled in, and cameras hovered, desperate to turn horror into show. Kaito looked at the lenses and severed their feed thread, and every screen in Argentum went black at once. Citizens stared in stunned silence, forced to see reality without narration, and the city felt suddenly honest. Hiroshi announced reforms with shaking resolve, and the guild's ranking board was taken down that same day. Kaito, Sora, and Ryu walked away from the plaza, 3 silhouettes against sunrise, carrying one absence. "What do we call ourselves now?" Ryu asked, and Sora replied, "Not performers," with a thin smile still. Kaito touched the sword and whispered, "Crimson Fangs, because some names are threads worth keeping." In the quiet, a single golden thread brushed his finger like farewell, and Kaito did not look back again,